The Assassin's Ruse. A Tale of the Assassin Without a Name by Scott Marlowe. Chapter 1. The Museum Job. The museum's corridors stretched before me, the marble floors and vaulted ceilings designed to make visitors feel small in the presence of history. Gas lamps lined the walls at regular intervals, their brass fixtures polished to a mirror shine, casting pools of amber light that left deep shadows between them. Columns of pale stone rose to support archways carved with geometric patterns, remnants of a classical style that predated the fall of the old gods, though whether the architecture was authentic or an imitation of it, I couldn't say. Display cases lined the outer walls, their glass panels reflecting the flickering light, ceremonial blades, crumbling tablets etched with forgotten scripts, jewelry whose gems had gone dark centuries ago. Placards beside each piece offered scholarly explanations written in the owner's own hand, the kind of self-congratulatory prose that transformed simple artifacts into monuments to the collector's refined taste. Everything about Valeren's Museum of Antiquities screamed wealth and self-importance, much like its owner. I navigated the halls unerringly, because I'd taken them multiple times over the past 3 days. Under different circumstances, I might have learned the lay of the place by disguising myself as a curious scholar or a maintenance worker, someone whose appearance didn't elicit a second thought. In this instance, however, I chose a different disguise altogether, one that allowed me to learn every exit, every blind spot, every corridor where shadows gathered thick enough to hide a man with murder on his mind. Tonight, like most nights, that man was me. "Everything check out?" the lead guardsman and my superior asked as I rounded the corner and entered the private gallery. "Everything checked out, boss. Pretty quiet." "Let's hope it stays that way," he said. "Take position with the others." The private gallery lay at the heart of the museum, accessible to staff and Mr. Valeren's most trusted associates. I joined 3 others already on duty, taking my post in the corner farthest from the entry as instructed. One gave me a nod. I returned it. 3 days of shared shifts had earned that much familiarity. My attention shifted to the main entry. Valeren had made enemies over the years, outbid the wrong collector, acquired items through unsavory means that left others holding empty purses and wounded pride. One of those enemies had paid handsomely to see him dead. The details of their grievance meant nothing to me. In my profession, they never did. I provided a service, nothing more. I didn't involve myself in the reasons why, didn't ask questions beyond those necessary to complete the job, and never considered the mark anything other than a target. Men like Mr. Varen made that last bit exceptionally easy. The contract specified tonight. Varen planned to sell a rare artifact to a buyer willing to pay a fortune for it. A private transaction, away from prying eyes, conducted in the heart of his own museum, where he believed himself untouchable. Some clients didn't care about such details. This one did. The job had come to me via an intermediary, a broker of sorts. So while I didn't know my client's identity, I had to assume, based on my instructions, that this was personal. It almost always was. Footsteps approached, multiple sets. The other guards straightened, adopting the stiff postures of men eager to demonstrate competence when their employer arrived. The door opened. Varen entered first, thin and pale as a winter morning, gold glittering on his fingers and at his throat. His beard-framed features made for sneering, and he scanned the gallery as if cataloging his possessions. The guards, the relics, all of it belonged to him. Not for much longer. 2 personal guards flanked Varen, better armed than the rest of us. Behind them came another man, presumably the buyer, middle-aged, wearing the understated clothes of an individual with money who didn't need to advertise it. He carried a leather case at his side and moved with the careful steps of a man who trusted no one present. Smart. He shouldn't. Varen led the buyer on a circuit of the room, gesturing at protective vitrines and launching into lectures about each piece they passed. A ceremonial dagger from the Temple of Chorus, stone tablets recovered from the sunken city off the coast of the Steel Islands, a bronze mask, which Varen claimed once belonged to a priest-king whose name time had forgotten. Merrick Varen had assembled quite a collection, Nearly half of it arrived through channels unable to survive legal scrutiny. The buyer nodded when appropriate, his expression suggesting he'd endured similar speeches before and found them tedious. I sympathized. Valeran's voice made you want to stab yourself just to have something more interesting to think about. They stopped before an empty pedestal in the gallery's center. Valeran faced his guest, hands clasped behind him in the manner of a man about to deliver important news. What I am about to show you, Mr. Harden, is not merely rare, but unique, a relic, ancient in origin, dedicated to a god whose name has faded into history. He paused for effect. The Eye of the Void. Mr. Harden's posture shifted, a subtle straightening that suggested genuine interest beneath the cultivated disinterest. I'd like to see it. Of course. Valeran snapped his fingers at a guardsman. Bring it. The guard disappeared through a side door. He returned carrying a velvet-lined box, which he placed on the pedestal with the exaggerated care of someone who knew exactly how much his employer paid for it. Valeran lifted the lid with theatrical reverence. The crystal inside was the size of a man's fist, cut into a prism shape with edges so precise they seemed to slice the surrounding air. Dark, darker than black, if such were possible. The gas lamps throughout the gallery flickered as their light approached the artifact's surface, bending toward it like water circling a drain before vanishing. The crystal didn't reflect, didn't refract. The crystal swallowed illumination the way a starving man swallows food, greedily and absolutely, giving nothing back. Even at a distance, something about it set me on edge, like standing at the edge of a cliff in absolute darkness, knowing the drop was there even if you couldn't see it. The hairs on my arms rose, and I fought the urge to retreat a step. Assassins don't spook easily. We can't afford to. But seeing the crystal, I understood why it had faded into obscurity. Pity Mr. Valeran couldn't have left it alone. Magnificent, Merrick breathed, his assessment not shared by anyone else in the gallery. Even Mr. Harden, who leaned in for a closer inspection, blanched and averted his gaze. I'll need to authenticate it, he stammered. Merrick's grin tightened. You doubt my word? Mr. Harden drew himself up at that, regaining his composure. I doubt everyone's word. It's why I'm still in business. He opened his leather case and withdrew a brass device bristling with gears and glass lenses, some kind of detection apparatus, alchemical from the look of it. Runes etched along its surface pulsed with faint light as he activated it. You understand? Mr. Valeran stepped aside, waving in grudging permission. Do what you must. He held the device over the crystal. Gears clicked and whirred. The lenses rotated, focusing and refocusing on the artifact below. A needle on the device swung left, then right, searching for a value it couldn't find until settling into position with a finality that caused Valeran's jaw to clench. The buyer frowned. This isn't the Eye of the Void. Silence. The guards shifted uncomfortably. I shifted with them out of curiosity, watching Valeran cycle through confusion, disbelief, and fury in the span of a heartbeat, the progression of a man whose world had tilted sideways. Impossible, he breathed. The resonance is wrong. Harden's voice carried no accusation, only the flat certainty of a man stating facts. I don't know what this is, but it's not what I came here to purchase. You're trying to sell me a forgery. I am not. Merrick snatched the device away from Harden, staring at the readings as if willing them to change. The needle didn't move. There must be some malfunction, some error in your instrument. My instruments do not malfunction, Mr. Valeran. I've authenticated over 200 pieces with this device. My authenticator has never been wrong. Merrick held the crystal to the nearest light. See how it drinks the illumination? Nothing other than a genuine relic of darkness exhibits such behavior. That may be so, Mr. Valeran, but this forgery does as well. Now, I set up this appointment in good faith, and you've wasted my evening. He reached for his case, snapping it shut with the practiced motion of a man who'd abandoned bad deals before. Wait! Merrick grabbed his arm. We had an agreement. The agreement was for the Eye of the Void, not a worthless fake. Mr. Harden squirmed free. I take my leave, sir." "Nobody leaves," Varen said. His voice shook with barely contained rage. "Not until I understand what's happened here. Guards!" The word cracked through the room like a whip. Every man in uniform straightened, hands dropping to weapons. My contract called for discretion, a clean kill whose responsibility might fall on any number of enemies Varen had made over the years. Though I hadn't planned this evening's meeting, a private transaction gone wrong provided the perfect cover. But a hostage situation? Witnesses who might talk? The plan was to take Merrick out immediately after the deal. This complicated matters. The buyer retreated toward the exit. "You can't hold me against my will." "I can do whatever I please. This is my museum, isn't it? And I have been robbed." "For all I know, it was you, sir." Hardin clutched his briefcase to his chest. "Why steal an artifact I intended to buy?" "A ruse, perhaps," Merrick cried. "No matter. I will get to the bottom of this if it's the last thing I ever do. Captain, secure this room, then begin your search. Find the thief who has stolen from me." The captain barked orders. Men responded, throwing the gallery into chaos as they ran in all directions. Some moved to block the exits. Others ran from the gallery to search for the perpetrator. I needed to move. Now. I grasped a hidden knife beneath my uniform. 2 steps brought me within striking distance. One clean thrust between the ribs, angled upward toward the heart. Varen would drop before anyone understood what had happened. The burgeoning chaos provided the perfect cover for my escape. Or would have if a figure in black hadn't just burst through a side door. Lithe, fast. A dark mask obscured everything but a feminine gaze that swept the room. The figure crossed the gallery in 3 strides, snatched the eye from its velvet box, and bolted for the main entrance before anyone reacted. In the next second, she was gone. "The eye!" Varen shrieked. "Stop her, you fools!" Never mind that it was a fake. While the guards surged forward, Mr. Hardin took advantage of the distraction to flee, vanishing through the side entry with his leather case still clutched to his chest. My window of opportunity had closed. The chaos I hoped to use to my advantage, usurped by another. I considered waiting until the guards had fled the room in pursuit, leaving Merrick alone and vulnerable. But the other's movement herded me along as part of the pursuit. Stopping drew the wrong kind of attention. So, wondering if I might still have time to circle back once the confusion had settled to finish the job, I put my contract aside and joined the chase. I let the others dash down the corridor and funnel into a stairwell ahead of me. Their boots thundered on the marble steps, the sound echoing off the walls in a cacophony of noise. The thief was already 2 flights above us, a flash of black disappearing around the curve of the stairs. Whoever she was good. The stairwell ended at a heavy door that the lead guards threw open with more enthusiasm than sense. Night air rushed in, cold and sharp with the odor of coal smoke from the city's chimneys. We piled through the doorway, emerging onto the museum's roof, a broad expanse of slate tiles punctuated by dormers, ventilation shafts, and the skeletal frames of maintenance walkways. The moon hung fat and yellow above Alchester's skyline, casting long shadows that stretched across the rooftop like haunting apparitions. The thief stood at the roof's far edge, silhouetted against the glow of gas lamps from the street below. She'd run herself into a corner. Maybe not so good after all. The guards spread out in a loose semicircle to cut off any escape. A 6 now, with more likely on the way. The odds looked bad. Little did I know that the guards should have brought more men. "Nowhere to run," the captain said, drawing his sword with the theatrical flourish of a man who enjoyed the sound of steel clearing leather. "Hand over what you stole, and Mr. Varen may show mercy." I stayed near the back of the group, curious to see how this played out. The thief tilted her head, considering. Her mask concealed her expression, but her posture suggested amusement rather than fear. "Mercy," she repeated, her voice light and clear. "From Varen. Now there's a thought." "Last chance. For you or me?" The captain let out a roar and lunged. She wasn't there. She'd read his movement, sidestepping with such grace that he looked clumsy by comparison. Her boot caught his ankle as he passed, sending him sprawling across the slate tiles with a grunt of surprise. The other guards rushed her. The first to reach her swept his arm wide, more intent on catching her than landing a clean blow. She ducked beneath his swing, drove her elbow into his ribs, and shoved him into the path of the second. They went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. The third swooped in low, trying to tackle her around the waist. She vaulted over him, using his back as a springboard, and landed in a crouch behind the fourth, who spun too slowly to stop a drawn knife from opening a shallow cut across his ribs. He dropped his weapon with a yelp. Before the guard she leaped over could react, she smashed her elbow into his face, sending him staggering onto his heels to trip over his captain. 5 down in as many heartbeats. I'd seen professional fighters who couldn't manage half that, but the 6th guard had circled wide during the initial rush, positioning himself between her and the roof's edge. Now, he attacked from behind while she recovered from her last strike, his blade aimed at the small of her back in a move I could only describe as distinctly ungentlemanly. She heard him, I could tell by the way her shoulders tensed, but she'd committed to the wrong angle and couldn't turn fast enough. I moved without thinking, a knife flying through the air before I'd consciously decided to throw it, spinning end over end across the distance to sink into the guard's shoulder. He screamed and dropped his sword, clutching at the wound as he staggered sideways. The thief saw the knife sticking out of the guard's shoulder and, settling into a fighting stance, faced me across the tangle of men. Our eyes met. Hers were dark in the moonlight, sharp and assessing, but also curious, wondering why I helped her. No time to ask. She sprinted for the roof's edge. "She's getting away!" a downed guard shouted, struggling to rise. The thief didn't slow down. She reached the edge and leaped without hesitation, launching herself into the air above a 4-story drop to the street below. I leaned over the parapet, in time to see her catch a thin wire stretched between the museum and a distant building across the street. And then she slid away into the darkness, fast and controlled, the wire singing beneath her weight. She landed on the far rooftop in seconds. As she unclipped from the line, she turned to glance at me, a black figure against the yellow glow of the distant lamps. She flashed a mock salute. Then she drew her knife, cut the wire so no one followed, and vanished into the shadows. I couldn't help but smile at the audacity of her escape. Several of the guards, including the captain, joined me at the roof's edge. "What happened?" The captain, flushed with anger and embarrassment, grumbled. "Where did she go?" I pointed at the building across the way. "Over there. I doubt we'll catch her now, sir." He followed the direction of my stare, took in the distance, and swore under his breath. I tried to stop her. I gestured at the guard still whimpering over the knife in his shoulder. Tried to bring her down. Carl got in the way. Sorry, Carl. Carl glared daggers of his own at me. "Maybe next time don't throw a knife, you arsehole." A reprimand died on the captain's lips. He had bigger problems than an underperforming guard, and he knew it. He'd lost the artifact, worthless but still, let the thief who'd stolen it escape, and now had to explain all of it to Mr. Varen. A thief had stolen a worthless trinket tonight. But what about the next time? "Get down to the street," he snapped at the others. "Search the surrounding blocks. She can't have gone far." He turned to me. "You. Help Carl get to the nearest hospital. Then report back to me." I moved to help Carl, who still cursed under his breath. Together, we reached the stairwell. Behind us, the captain barked more useless orders. The thief was long gone. At the bottom of the stairs, Carl stopped. "Get your damn knife out of me." "You sure?" "Just do it." So I did it, yanking the knife free. Carl grunted in pain and sank against the wall. When I moved closer to help him, he waved me away. "I'll get to the hospital myself." Then he staggered off. Since other guards had gone ahead of us to search the surrounding area, I followed in their wake, pretending interest in catching the thief until I had strolled about a block away. Then I simply kept walking, leaving the search in Valeren's Museum of Antiquities behind. Regrettably, I put my contract on hold for the time being. Valeren's security at the museum would triple after tonight, and paranoia would have him second-guessing everyone around him. I hated disappointing clients, but complications happened. I'd get the job done eventually. I always did. As I made my way across Alchester with my sights set on home, it wasn't the failed contract that occupied my thoughts. The thief did. 3 days of preparation. 3 days of learning patrol routes, bribing the right people, and establishing myself as another forgettable guard. All that effort. Wasted because some woman in a mask had decided tonight was the night to steal a fake relic. I wondered if she knew the trouble she had caused me, or even if the prize she'd stolen was a forgery. More importantly, I wondered if we'd meet again. Anyone bold enough to steal from Merrick Valerin in the middle of a private sale was someone I very much wanted to get to know. Chapter 2. The Lazy Minstrel. The next evening I claimed my usual table at the Lazy Minstrel, the one in back where no one could approach me unseen. Ophelia had noticed my arrival from behind the scarred wooden bar and dispatched a girl with a glass and a bottle of the Thornfield Red I favored. The wine here wasn't remarkable, but it was honest, and the minstrel offered something more valuable than a refined vintage. A place where an assassin could disappear into the crowd and leave the business of murder at the door. I'd barely finished my first glass when the tavern door opened, admitting a woman who drew the eye of every man in the room. She paused at the threshold, scanning the crowd with a sharp, assessing gaze. Her clothes were simple but well made, a dark green tunic over fitted trousers. Auburn hair fell in loose waves just past her neck, catching the lamplight in shades of copper and rust. She was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that made you forget what you'd been thinking about. Her search ended when she saw me in my corner. Recognition, or perhaps satisfaction at having found her quarry, flickered across her features. She crossed the tavern with purpose, weaving between tables without slowing, and dropped into the chair across from me without waiting for an invitation. Up close, she was striking. Her eyes were auburn like her hair, flecked with gray, and when the lamplight caught them just right, they became mesmerizing, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. She may have traded her blacks for civilian clothes, but I still saw the thief beneath. The way she held herself, the way her hands stayed visible on the table but close to the knives I knew she carried. She fixed me with a penetrating stare that I held, though not without effort. She withdrew a dark, prism-shaped crystal from her pocket, then set it on the table between us with more force than necessary. Forgery or not, it still caught the candlelight and swallowed it whole, the same wrongness as before radiating from its faceted surface. "Where's the real one?" she asked. I raised an eyebrow. "I beg your pardon?" "Don't play stupid, it doesn't suit you." She leaned forward. "You were there last night. You helped me escape, and now I find out the eye I risked my neck for is a worthless fake. Other than me, you were the only other person who didn't belong there last night, so either you switched it or you know who did." I considered the accusation while I took another sip of wine. The crystal sat between us, dark and unsettling. The forger who created it deserved recognition for adding the light-absorbing magic, which I assume mimicked the real thing. It was a nice touch. "I don't know anything about the eye," I said. "I was there on other business. Business that your dramatic entrance interrupted, I might add." "Other business?" Her gaze narrowed. "What kind of business requires disguising yourself as a museum guard?" "The kind I don't like to discuss in public places, especially with people I don't know." "Humph," she said, disappointed I hadn't come out and said the reason. "So, she did it for me. You're an assassin." I neither confirmed nor denied it. In my experience, people who leveled such accusations either already knew the answer or were fishing for one. In this case, she seemed to know already. Either way, silence served me better than words. She sat back, arms crossed. "Thjorn told me where to find you. He said you'd be here, drinking wine and brooding." A pause. His words, not mine. Thjorn. Of course. The old barbarian had a talent for meddling in affairs that didn't concern him, and for collecting strays who grew into dangerous criminals. I should know, since I was one of them. Figures he'd sent her my way. "So, Thjorn sent you here because he thought I might have something to do with the forgery. He knows that isn't my style." "Nobody sent me. I can clean up my own messes. Like I said, no one else was out of place other than you and me, so I figured you might know something. See how the crystal absorbs the candlelight? It mimics the genuine artifact. Someone went to great lengths to make sure no one discovered this was a fake. Since I'd already surmised as much myself, I nodded in agreement. If not for last night's transaction, I doubt anyone would have noticed for some time, allowing the real thief to get away clean. I swirled the wine in my glass, watching it catch the light. So, Miss West, the only question that remains is what do you intend to do about it? You know my name? Of course, Elizabeth West, the best thief in Alchester. Can steal anything from anyone, or so people say. People say that? She sounded surprised. Those same people failed to mention that you were reckless. Elizabeth's brow furrowed. Me? Hardly. I had the situation completely under control last night. I'll admit, I was a little off with my timing. Merrick's deal to sell the eye wasn't supposed to go down until later that night. Imagine my surprise when I discovered the artifact already on display for the buyer. The meeting got moved up unexpectedly, I said. Elizabeth shrugged. Shat happens. I'll admit snatching the relic right from underneath Merrick's nose wasn't the original plan, but what thief doesn't have to improvise every once in a while? All in all, the job went down pretty smoothly and I got away clean. If not for the forgery, I'd say it was a good night. A good night that almost ended with you dead. You're welcome, by the way, for saving your life. She sat up. You didn't save my life. I had those guards right where I wanted them. I smirked from behind my wineglass. If you say so. The tavern's ambient noise filled the space between us. The clink of glasses, murmured conversations, the occasional burst of laughter from a table near the door. By the time I finished taking a drink, she'd come to grips with the reality of the situation. Okay, fine. You might have helped a little. Thank you. You're quite welcome. Elizabeth plucked the crystal from the table, turning it over in her hand. Someone stole the real eye before Merrick sold it and I could steal it. Someone who knew Mr. Varen had it, knew he planned to sell it, and knew how to create a convincing fake. That's not amateur work. It certainly narrows down the list of potential perpetrators, I said. If I didn't know any better, I'd say the guild had something to do with it. Except I'm part of the guild. A rogue thief, then. Unlikely. No one's dumb enough to cross Thorn like that. Unsanctioned theft gets you dead, real fast. Elizabeth returned the crystal to her pocket and stood. Leaving so soon? I came here for answers. Seems I've wasted my time. Maybe. Or maybe we can help each other. I had no stake in her commission. No reason to help her. But I also didn't want her to leave. Not yet. She eyed me suspiciously. How? As we've already established, you don't seem to know much. As much as you, it seems. She couldn't deny that, so she said, An offer to help usually comes with conditions. What's in it for you and why the offer at all? Maybe I'm curious about who switched the artifacts, or maybe I'm offering because we just met and I'd like to get to know you better. So far, Elizabeth West had proven to have a daring personality, a striking appearance, and a sharp wit. Who wouldn't want to get to know her better? If that's your way of asking me out, it needs some work. A lot of work. I spread my hands in a sign of innocence. Can't a couple of professionals share resources? Elizabeth laughed, a sharp sound I found alluring despite it carrying no warmth. She sat down again. Professionals? We may take payment for our services, but I only steal things. You kill people. We're criminals, not colleagues. The distinction seems academic. It isn't. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. I've heard the stories about you. The minister found with his throat slit. The merchant whose body they never recovered. The nobleman who died in his own bedchamber while his guards stood outside the door. Everywhere you go, you leave corpses behind. This conversation was not progressing as I had hoped. You shouldn't believe everything you hear. Which part am I not supposed to believe? The murders or the methods? I held her gaze. I provide a service, nothing more. Some people need to die. I'm good at making sure the right ones do the dying. And who decides which people deserve it? You? Your clients? Does it matter? It matters. She stood once more. Thanks for the offer, but I have a feeling I'd spend more time watching my back than searching for the eye. If you'll excuse me, I have an artifact to find before my deadline expires. The tavern door swung wide, which wasn't attention-grabbing unto itself, except a boy of perhaps 12 rushed in, scanned the place with some urgency, and, upon spotting us in the corner, hurried over, weaving between tables with practiced ease. "Message for you," he said, slightly out of breath. He thrust a sealed envelope toward us. "Both of you." I took the letter before Elizabeth reached for it. The envelope bore no address, no sender's mark. Only 2 names written in spidery script across the front. Elizabeth West and the man without a name. "How'd you know to find us here?" Elizabeth asked the messenger. But the boy had already made his way halfway through the sea of tables on his way out. "Who sent it?" "Doesn't say." "Well, open it already." I broke the seal and unfolded the parchment within. I read the letter through once before handing it to Elizabeth, who returned to her chair and read it aloud in a hushed voice. "You are hereby requested to present yourselves at Solvain's Curios and Antiquities this evening, when the bell rings 9. The matter concerns a relic of considerable interest to us all, specifically the Eye of the Void. Come to the intersection of Merchants' Row and Cobbler's Lane. The shop will find you. Mordecai Solvain." "Solvain," she said. "I've heard of him." "As have I. A wizard who trades in rare artifacts. People say his shop wanders the city, appearing in a different place each night. People also say you can't find it unless it finds you. The letter does say the shop will find us." Elizabeth drummed her knuckles on the table. "The guild has done work for him before. He pays well and keeps his word, which puts him ahead of most clients in this city." She frowned at the letter. "But I've never heard of him summoning anyone like this. How does he know about the eye? How does he know about us? Or that we were both here right at this moment? Questions worth asking him in person. You're suggesting we go?" "I'm suggesting we hear what he has to say." I dropped coins on the table and rose. 9 bells. That's only an hour from now. Elizabeth puffed up her cheeks and let out a breath. "Okay, fine. We do this." She handed me the letter. "Meet me at the intersection when the bell strikes. Try to arrive on time." I flashed her a mock salute. "Oh, and so we're clear, if we wind up stumbling into a trap, I'm blaming you." "Noted." She slipped into the crowd and vanished, leaving me alone with an empty wine glass and a letter from a wizard. I read the invitation again, committing the words to memory before folding it away. Then I followed in her wake, leaving the lazy minstrel behind and disappearing into the gathering dusk. Chapter 3. The Disappearing Shop. I spotted Elizabeth already waiting at the intersection ahead, standing with arms folded beneath a gas lamp that painted her in amber and shadow. Gone were the civilian clothes, replaced by attire suited to her trade. Dark satin leggings hugged her legs, tucked into soft leather boots. A fitted leather vest, studded with small bronze rivets, covered a black fabric shirt that drank in the lamplight. Bracers wrapped her forearms, not decorative pieces but functional armor, the leather tooled and reinforced to deflect a blade. A thin belt hung with pouches containing the tools of her profession, lockpicks, smoke powder, perhaps something more exotic. A row of throwing knives rested in sheaths along her thigh, their hilts angled for a quick draw. I suspected she had more blades hidden in unseen places. No mask this time. She had her auburn hair tied away from her face, gathered into a practical ponytail. The style revealed the sharp lines of her jaw and cheekbones, accentuating features I found attractive, even when set in a peaked expression. "You're late," she said as I approached. "I heard the bell." I wasn't sure how long ago it had been. "Almost 30 minutes ago. I almost went ahead without you." Her gaze traveled over me, taking in the changes. "At least you dressed for the occasion." Dark leather armor covered my torso, fitted close to allow freedom of movement. Metal bracers protected my forearms. A cloak the color of coal hung from my shoulders, its hem weighted to keep it from billowing in unexpected breezes. At my hip hung one of my long knives, a 1.5 feet of curved steel with a serrated back edge. The blade's twin rested on the opposite side. Over my shoulder, the hilt of my steel island sword, the volcanic black metal so sharp it cut through any defense, rose above my cloak's collar. "I wasn't sure what this wizard has in store for us," I said. "Better to arrive prepared." On that, at least, we agree. Elizabeth faced the intersection. "Speaking of wizards, look." I knew this intersection. I'd crossed it 100 times over the years, used the narrow alley between the tailor's establishment and the apothecary as a shortcut more than once. That alley was perhaps 2 feet wide, barely enough for a man to pass through sideways. Yet somehow, wedged into that impossible space, a storefront now occupied the gap. The buildings on either side seemed to have shifted apart without moving, creating space where none had existed before. A weathered sign, creaking above the door despite the absence of wind, read, "Solvains Curios and Antiquities." "That's not possible," I murmured, more to myself than to Elizabeth. "Go ahead, take it in," she said. "I've had 30 minutes to come to grips with it. Yesterday there wasn't enough space for a broom closet, let alone an entire shop. Yet, there it is." She shook her head, auburn ponytail swaying with the motion. "I've heard the stories, same as you. A wandering shop that appears where it will. But seeing it is something else. It makes me wonder what the stories may have left out." The street around us had emptied. Minutes ago, merchants and others had hurried past on their evening errands, voices carrying in the night air. Now the intersection felt abandoned, as though the city itself had stepped aside to make room for Mordecai's establishment. Gas lamps flickered at the edges of my vision, their light seeming dimmer than usual. The shadows between buildings appeared deeper, more solid, like ink pooled in the cracks of the world. I didn't like it. The feeling of being watched, of standing in a space that played by rules I didn't understand. Assassins survived by controlling their environment, by knowing every exit, every angle, every potential threat. Here, the environment defied control, shifting and bending according to the will of the wizard waiting inside. Elizabeth sensed my unease. "Having second thoughts?" "Several. You?" "At least a dozen." She drew a slow breath and squared her shoulders. "But we didn't come here to stand outside gawking. Shall we?" "After you," she smirked. "Hoping I'll trigger one of those traps?" "Not at all. I was only being polite. Besides, if there is a trap, I don't doubt you have the awareness and skill to disable it." She started toward the shop's entrance, her boots silent on the cobblestones. "Remember, you suggested we come." The entry to Solvains Curios and Antiquities bore no handle, no knocker, no visible means of entry. Elizabeth raised her hand to push it open, but before her fingers touched the wood, it swung inward of its own accord, revealing darkness beyond. She glanced at me, one eyebrow raised. Then she crossed the threshold into the unknown. I was no more than a step behind her. Once inside, the door closed behind us without a sound. The darkness disappeared in a heartbeat as light bloomed from unidentifiable sources, not candles or gas lamps, but a soft illumination coming from everywhere and nowhere, as if the air itself carried a faint glow. My eyes adjusted, and the shop revealed itself. From the outside, the storefront's width spanned perhaps 15 feet. Inside, the space stretched beyond reason. Aisles extended into shadow, far longer than any building on Merchant's Row could contain. Shelves rose toward a ceiling lost in darkness above, packed with objects that defied easy categorization. The walls, what walls I saw, leaned at angles defying structural stability, yet the shop stood solid around us. Gravity and geometry had no authority here, it seemed. Elizabeth let out a low whistle. "This isn't possible." "You said that about the exterior." "I know. And yet." She gestured at the endless shelves stretching before us. "Here we are." The air carried a peculiar scent, old paper and dust, incense long since burned to ash, and beneath it a metallic characteristic, like blood or copper or magic too old to name. The scent of power had settled into the bones of this place over decades, perhaps centuries. We moved deeper into the shop, stepping carefully between displays and pedestals cluttered with Mordecai's collection. Every surface held something strange. A music box sat open on a nearby shelf, its tiny dancer frozen mid-pirouette. As we passed, the figure's head followed us, painted eyes tracking our movement, though the mechanism remained still. Elizabeth's hand drifted toward a knife. I shook my head, a warning, and she let her hand drop, though her fingers stayed close to the hilt. Glass cases lined one wall, their contents suspended by preservation spells that kept time at bay. A butterfly with wings of hammered gold, still as death, its proboscis extended toward a flower that never wilted. A human hand severed at the wrist, the flesh gray but whole, fingers curled around a coin bearing a duke's face I didn't recognize. A child's doll with real hair and glass eyes that wept actual tears, leaving tracks down porcelain cheeks that never dried. "Not scary at all," Elizabeth muttered. The shelves grew more crowded. Skulls of creatures that had never existed outside nightmares. Bottles filled with liquids that moved against their containers, pressing the glass as if seeking escape. A sword made of frozen fire, with cold vapor rising from its edge. A mirror that showed not our reflections, but an empty room. No, not empty. Something moved in its depths, but peering closer didn't make it any more recognizable. Books filled an entire alcove, their spines bearing titles in both familiar and foreign languages. Some whispered when we drew near, voices too soft to understand, but insistent nonetheless. Others remained silent, though I noticed one volume pulsing with a faint heartbeat, its leather cover rising and falling with a slow rhythm. "Don't touch anything," I said. Wasn't planning on it. Elizabeth's voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. She'd faced down half a dozen armed guards without flinching, but Mordecai's collection unnerved her. The assortment unnerved me too, though I kept that to myself. We rounded a corner, or what passed for a corner here, and found ourselves in a broader area. Display cases gave way to cluttered tables and overflowing cabinets. Maps covered a wall, depicting coastlines and continents I didn't recognize, waters marked with warnings in red ink, and lands labeled with indecipherable names. A globe spun of its own volition in the corner. The aisle twisted again, leading us through a forest of hanging objects, wind chimes that made no sound, dream catchers woven from spider silk and silver thread, a mobile of tiny ships that sailed in circles through still air. Something brushed my shoulder as I passed, a taxidermied raven mounted on a perch, its head swiveling to watch me pass. The bird's stare held intelligence no dead thing should possess. Elizabeth stopped beside a display that caught the ambient light and scattered it in strange patterns. A collection of crystals, each a different color, arranged in a spiral on black velvet. They hummed at a frequency I felt more than heard, a vibration in my chest that quickened my pulse. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a small card beside the display. In elegant script, the card read, "Crystallized Dreams, Various Sources. Handle with care." Crystallized dreams? "I don't want to know," she said, moving on. The shop opened further, and I caught sight of our destination. A desk sat at the far end of this impossible space, massive and ancient, its surface buried beneath papers, artifacts, and the accumulated debris of decades. Behind it, in a high-backed chair that dwarfed his frame, waited the wizard, Mordecai Solvane. I matched Elizabeth's slowing pace. Now that we had seen our host, neither of us was eager to reach him. "Still think coming here was a good idea?" she asked quietly. "Ask me again after we leave. If we leave, that is." "Pessimism doesn't suit you," she said. "Neither does dying in a wizard's curiosity shop." She stepped forward. "Let's get this over with." Mordecai Solvane sat behind his desk like a spider at the center of its web, watching our approach with eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes were his most striking feature, bright green, unnaturally so, the color of poison or spring leaves depending on how the light caught them. They possessed intelligence that his aged frame did little to diminish. Sharp, calculating, the hawkish gaze of a predator wearing the skin of a grandfather. The rest of him appeared ancient. Long gray hair hung in unkempt wisps around a gaunt face crinkled like parchment left too long in the sun. A beard of the same gray reached to his chest, equally neglected, stained here and there with what might have been ink. Decades of hunching over books and forbidden knowledge had left him stooped, his spine curved like a question mark. When he shifted in his chair, his movements carried the deliberate slowness of someone for whom every motion required consideration. His hands, though, didn't match the rest of him. Long-fingered and elegant, they moved with surprising dexterity as he shuffled papers on his desk. Rings adorned nearly every finger. Silver, gold, copper, set with gems of various colors that caught the shop's ambient light. Each ring, I suspected, served a purpose beyond decoration. An amulet hung against his chest on a tarnished chain, its surface etched with arcane symbols. He wore loose robes that might once have been fine, a deep burgundy that had faded over the years to something duller, patched in places with fabric that didn't quite match. We stopped a few feet from his desk. Neither of us sat, though 2 chairs waited for us. Sitting put us at a disadvantage, lower than him, and neither Elizabeth nor I was inclined to give ground when we were already at such a disadvantage. Mordecai studied us from beneath bushy gray brows, his demeanor carrying all the warmth of a winter frost. Seconds stretched into an uncomfortable silence. When he spoke, his words came out dry and raspy, like pages turning in an old book. At last. The thief and the assassin and the thief. The words sounded like an accusation. My invitation specified 9 bells. The bell has tolled 9.5. I do not appreciate having my time wasted. One of us has difficulty telling time, Elizabeth said, casting a sidelong glance in my direction. I shrugged. We're here now. Mordecai's lip curled either in displeasure or amusement. The young today have no sense of urgency, no appreciation for the value of punctuality. As the seconds ticked by, I wondered if you planned to come at all. As I said, we're here. Perhaps you'd like to tell us why you summoned us, wizard. Your letter mentioned the Eye of the Void. I am aware of what my letter mentioned. I wrote it, didn't I? He waved a ring-laden hand as if shooing away a fly. Impatient as well as tardy. A poor combination by any measure, let alone in one who trades in death. Elizabeth folded her arms. If you plan to spend the evening insulting us, we can leave. I have better things to do than stand here being lectured by a man who looks like he hasn't seen sunlight in half a century. Mordecai's gaze fixed on her with sudden intensity. For a heartbeat, the air in the shop thickened, some unseen energy raising the hair on my arms. Then the sensation passed, and the wizard let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a cough. It was difficult to tell. Spirit to match your beauty, he said. Good. I wondered if Thorn's protégés would prove as formidable as their reputations suggest, or if the old barbarian had begun collecting strays of lesser quality. He leaned forward, ancient joints creaking with the motion, and steepled his fingers before him. Very well. Since you are both so eager to dispense with pleasantries, let us discuss business. Please, I said. Mordecai removed a small velvet pouch from a drawer. He upended the pouch onto the desk. A dark crystal tumbled out, identical to the one Elizabeth had shown me at the Lazy Minstrel. The same size, the same prism shape, the same light-drinking surface that made me want to look away. Do you recognize this? He asked. Elizabeth's hand plunged into her pocket and came out empty. It's the forgery. How? Mordecai waved in dismissal. A parlor trick, nothing more. I acquired it from your pocket approximately 30 seconds after you entered my shop. Checking pouches and sheaths, Elizabeth's darkened expression softened slightly when she found everything else in place. You could have asked, she said. I could have. I chose not to. Consider it a demonstration. Mordecai pushed the crystal aside with one long finger, as if touching it for too long might contaminate him. This forgery is exceptional work. The enchantment that allows it to absorb light is nearly identical to the genuine relic. Whoever created it possessed significant skill and significant knowledge of the eye's properties. We already worked that much out, I said. Did you? How clever of you. The wizard's tone suggested he found us anything but. What you have not worked out, what you cannot have worked out, is who created it, who stole the genuine eye from Valeren's gallery, or where that eye currently resides. These are the questions that brought you to my door, are they not? Elizabeth and I exchanged a glance. Actually, I said, your letter brought us to your door. You still haven't told us what you want. Mordecai huffed. Is he always so obtuse? Elizabeth shrugged. Probably. We only met last night. Perhaps you should listen rather than posture. Mordecai settled in his chair, his gaze moving between us with the focused attention of a cat watching mice. I have information you need, and you in turn have skills I still require. We shall see if we can extend our arrangement in such a way that everyone benefits. Wait a minute, I said. You want to hire us? Impatient, Mordecai rattled his fingers on his desk. I think what he's saying, Elizabeth said, is he already did. The pieces fell into place with an unpleasant click. You hired me to steal the eye from Varen, Elizabeth said. It wasn't a question. I did. Mordecai inclined his head, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or a slight bow. Through the usual intermediaries, of course. The guild requires its protocols, and I have no objection to working within established systems when they serve my purposes. Besides, it's always a good idea to insulate myself from the details of such a venture. And him? Elizabeth jerked her chin in my direction. Did you? The contract on Merrick Valeren's life also came from me. The wizard's tone carried no apology. Through similar but different channels, naturally. Commissioning a theft and a murder through the same broker invites awkward questions. The intermediary who had delivered my contract, a man I'd worked with before, whose discretion I trusted, had never mentioned the client's identity, and I'd never asked. Such was the nature of the business. But knowing Mordecai Sylvain sat at the other end of the transaction made me consider exercising more caution about which jobs I accepted in the future. You wanted Valen dead and the eye stolen on the same night, I said. Obviously. Valeren's paranoia would have reached new heights after losing the eye. Getting to him afterward would have proven considerably more difficult, even for someone of your reputation. Mordecai's lip curled. Unfortunately, neither of you completed your assigned tasks. The real Eye of the Void remains at large, and Mr. Valen remains among the living. A disappointing outcome all around. Hold on, Elizabeth said. I stole exactly what you asked me to steal. It's not my fault someone switched the artifact before I got there. Nor is it mine. The wizard spread ring-laden fingers. Our original arrangement specified the Eye of the Void. You brought me a worthless fake. Until the genuine article is in my possession, your contract remains unfulfilled. Elizabeth said nothing because she knew he was right. However, I am not an unreasonable man. Since I recognize you did not foresee the forgery, I am prepared to offer you additional compensation when you complete your commission. Elizabeth's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She weighed options and calculated odds, deciding whether to argue further or let the matter drop. When her fingers relaxed, I knew she had made her decision. Fine, she said. Satisfied, Mordecai fixed his unsettling stare on me. As for you, assassin, your target has changed. Mr. Valen is no longer my concern. Whoever stole the genuine eye from his gallery is. You want me to kill someone whose identity you don't know? I want you to find them first, then deal with them. Consider it a two-part commission. I folded my arms. Finding people isn't my specialty. It isn't mine either, Elizabeth said before Mordecai drew her in any deeper. Too late. Perhaps it is a skill neither of you possesses in great measure, the old wizard said, which is why you will work together. When the eye is in my possession and you have eliminated the thief, you will both receive the payments originally agreed upon, plus a bonus for your additional troubles. Elizabeth shifted from one foot to the other. I shared her discomfort. But Mordecai had us cornered. We both had time invested, and walking away meant leaving the money he owed us on the table. I didn't know about Elizabeth, but that didn't sit well with me. You must at least have some idea who took it, I said. You don't strike me as the type to operate in the dark. Who do you suspect? The wizard's fingers drummed across his desk, rings clicking against the wood. Marek Volarin has rivals, collectors who compete for the same artifacts. One may have struck first rather than wait for Volarin's sale to complete. Any names? Elizabeth asked. Several. But that is your task to determine. I run in the same circles with some of them, so I'll say nothing without firmer ground to stand on. Find the eye and find who took it. Then deal with the thief or the person who hired him. I don't care about the details. Just make sure this person no longer operates in our fair city. These are the tasks before you. Remember, I expect results, not excuses. He dismissed us with a wave. Do try to be punctual next time. We took our leave without further argument. Neither of us was inclined to test the limits of Mordecai's hospitality, such as it was. The return trip through the shop felt different, shorter. The endless aisles that had stretched into shadow contracted around us, as if the space itself exhaled, pushing us closer to the exit. The hanging objects we'd passed before, the silent wind chimes, the sailing ships, the spider silk dream catchers, were gone, replaced by different curiosities. A jar of floating eyeballs that swiveled to follow our passage, a creature made of smoke inside a birdcage, a portrait whose subject aged as we watched, skin wrinkling and hair graying in the span of a heartbeat before resetting to youth and beginning the cycle anew. Elizabeth kept her eyes forward. Smart. The exit appeared earlier than we expected. One moment, we passed a shelf of ticking clocks, each showing a different time in a different city. The next, we stood before the entrance, its wood as featureless as when we'd arrived. The door swung open without prompting, revealing the night beyond. We stepped through together. The intersection of Merchant's Row and Cobbler's Lane appeared the same as when we'd left it. Gas lamps flickered at their posts. The buildings of the tailor and apothecary stood where they'd always stood. But between them, where Solvain's curios and antiquities had wedged itself into an impossible space, only the narrow alley remained. The shop had vanished, as if it had never existed. Elizabeth let out a breath. That was unpleasant. Yes. We stood in silence. The night air felt cleaner somehow, less oppressive, though the memory of Mordecai's collection lingered like an unpleasant taste. So, Elizabeth said finally, turning to face me. Partners, then. At least until we complete the job. It appears so. This doesn't mean I trust you. I still plan to watch my back, and when we're finished, we go our separate ways. Fair enough. Also, what am I supposed to call you? I can't go around yelling, hey, you. It doesn't matter much, I said. Pick whatever name you like. Oh, you don't want me picking one, she said, flashing me a mischievous grin that I returned. I'm sure you'll be kind, I said. Now, how do we go about finding this mysterious thief? I know someone who might help, Elizabeth said, adjusting the pouch on her belt, checking its contents by habit. A fortune teller in the shambles. She knows things. A fortune teller? Don't give me that look. Madame Nadira is the real thing. If anyone can give us insight into whoever stole the eye, it's her. Fortune tellers and mystics weren't usually my preferred sources of information. Too much smoke and mirrors, too little substance. But we had nothing else to go on, and Elizabeth clearly trusted this woman. That counted for something. Lead on, I said. Elizabeth started down the street. I fell in beside her, almost as if I belonged there. We'd find the eye and deal with whoever took it, and when we finished the job, we'd go our separate ways. At least, that was the plan. Chapter 4. The Fortune Teller. We left the respectable districts behind, trading the orderly gas-lit streets for something older and more desperate. Here in the shambles, cracked and uneven cobblestones lined the roads. Soot and grime darkened every surface, walls, windows, the faces of the buildings themselves, as if industry had dipped the district in ash. Makeshift fires burned in metal barrels at irregular intervals. Clusters of shivering residents gathered around them for warmth. The air carried the stink of refuse, coal smoke, and unwashed humanity, thick enough to taste. Alchester's prosperity didn't reach this far. Neither did its laws. Elizabeth navigated the narrow alleys with confident familiarity, moving without hesitation, ducking through gaps between buildings and cutting across courtyards littered with debris. I knew my way around the district, but not like her, I realized. I kept pace and stayed silent. The few residents we passed watched us with the wary gazes of people who'd learned to size up strangers quickly. Some recognized Elizabeth, nods exchanged, subtle acknowledgments between those who shared history in these streets. No one acknowledged me. If nothing else, they knew better than to attract my attention. "You grew up here," I said. "What gave it away?" "The people here know you for one, but you also seem to know your way around, more so than a person who passes through occasionally." "Everyone comes from somewhere. The shambles is my somewhere. I got out mostly, but some things stay with you." I wasn't criticizing. Good, because I wasn't apologizing. My mom got herself hooked on Devil's Tongue since before I can remember, so I didn't have much choice but to fend for myself. You do what you have to do to survive, you know? She turned down another alley, this one narrower than the rest, barely wide enough for two people to walk abreast. We're almost there. Our destination announced itself through smell before sight. Incense, thick and cloying, drifting through a beaded curtain hanging in an otherwise unremarkable doorway. The small and crooked building squeezed between a boarded-up butcher's stall and what might have been a pawnbroker's establishment. No sign marked the entrance. None was needed. Elizabeth paused at the threshold. "Before we go in, Nadira is important to me. She's been part of my life since I was a girl. If she doesn't outright recognize you, she'll discern the air about you." "Meaning?" "Meaning she'll know what you do for a living." I might have shrugged if Elizabeth hadn't stressed Nadira's importance to her. Instead, I nodded. "I'll try to keep a low profile. Promise." She studied me with a furrowed brow, unsure. But we were here, and we agreed to see this through, so she let out a breath and said, "She might make you feel uncomfortable." "I'm never uncomfortable. Everyone's uncomfortable around Nadira. She has a way of seeing things people would rather keep hidden." Elizabeth slid through the beaded curtain, the strands clicking together behind her. "Just act polite." I followed her inside. The accumulated tools of fortune-telling and herbcraft covering every surface made the front area feel cramped and cluttered. Jars of dried plants lined crooked shelves. Bundles of strange herbs hung from the ceiling, their scent mingling with the incense to create an aroma at once pleasant and unsettling. Charms and talismans dangled from hooks, catching what little light filtered through the grimy window. A small table covered in dark cloth dominated the center of the space. At the table's center, I spotted a deck of cards that had seen its share of shuffling. A beaded curtain on the room's other side parted, and Madame Nadira emerged. She was smaller than I'd expected, slight and weathered, her frame suggesting someone who had never known excess but had always found a way to survive. The wrinkles of a life lived hard marked her dusky skin, and a colorful scarf, speaking of distant lands and old traditions, covered her gray hair. Jewelry abounded, rings on every finger, bracelets climbing her forearms, necklaces layered against her chest. When she moved, she chimed like wind through metal bells, each piece announcing her presence. But it was her eyes that commanded attention. Dark and deep, they held a weight of knowledge most people never possessed. She looked at me, and I felt the discomfort Elizabeth had warned me about, as if the old gypsy woman read me like one of her cards. Every secret, every sin, laid bare before her. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice carrying the warm lilt of the southern reaches. "You brought someone." "Madame Nadira." Elizabeth embraced the old woman with genuine affection. I'm sorry it's been so long. Time passes. The young have better things to do than visit old women in cramped shops. Nadira's attention remained fixed on me, even as she returned the embrace. Though I confess, I did not expect you to bring a killer to my door. The words hung in the air. Elizabeth's expression caught between embarrassment and resignation. He's not, she started to say. I mean, he is, but he is exactly what I said. Nadira released Elizabeth and stepped closer, her jewelry chiming with each step. She stopped an arm's length away, those dark eyes boring into mine. I can see the shadows following you, the lives you've taken, the blood on your hands that no amount of washing will ever remove. I held her stare. I made my choice a long time ago. I don't regret it. No, you don't, do you? Had your revenge, yet you kept on, protecting someone, I think, still protecting this person. She nodded, acknowledgement becoming approval. At least you have a reason. That is more than most can say. Nadira, Elizabeth said, a note of warning in her voice. We're here because we need your help. You always need something when you visit. But the old woman's tone carried affection rather than accusation. She moved to the table, lowering herself into a chair with the careful movements of an elderly person whose joints had seen better days. Sit, both of you. Tell me what trouble you found. We sat across from her. Elizabeth explained the situation, telling her about the Eye of the Void, the forgery, and Mordecai Solvain's commission. Nadira listened without interruption, fingers idly shuffling the deck of cards. When Elizabeth finished, the fortune-teller remained silent for a long moment. Mordecai Solvain, she said finally. That old spider. You know him? I know of him. We move in different circles, but sometimes those circles overlap. Nadira's lip curled. He collects things, dangerous things, and he does not collect without purpose, whatever he may claim. Can you help us find whoever stole the eye? Elizabeth asked. Perhaps. Nadira set the cards down and studied Elizabeth. But first, I want to understand something. She gestured between us. The two of you. How did you come to work together? Circumstance, I said. Mordecai hired us both without either of us knowing. We're stuck with each other until we finish the job. Circumstance, Nadira said, repeating the word as if tasting it. Is that what you believe? It's what happened. The old woman smiled, a small, secretive gesture whose meaning I couldn't guess. The cards tell a different story. She gathered the deck and shuffled with surprising dexterity, her rings catching the dim light. Indulge an old woman. Let me do a reading before we discuss business. Elizabeth groaned. Nadira, I prefer you didn't. She cast a sharp glance my way. We both prefer you didn't. I shrugged. What's the harm? Nadira grinned. It will only take a moment, and I have learned to trust what the cards reveal, even when their message is unexpected. She set the deck before Elizabeth. Cut them. Elizabeth frowned. No. Do it or I won't help you. I can do it if... I started to say, reaching out. You stay out of this, Elizabeth said, batting my hand away. Fine, Nadira. I'll cut your damn cards. But then you help us. Of course, the old gypsy woman intoned. Elizabeth reached out and divided the deck. Nadira gathered the cards and laid them out on the dark cloth, her movements practiced and precise. 3 cards in a row, then 2 more below, all face down. Get on with it already, Elizabeth said, her voice carrying an edge. Nadira flipped the first card over. The crossed blades. Conflict. 2 forces beginning in opposition. She moved to the second. The shared path. A journey undertaken together. The third card. The unveiled face. Secrets revealed. Masks removed. Truth seen where deception once stood. Elizabeth pursed her lips. And the others? Nadira's finger hovered over the 4th card. She flipped it. The braided river. Two currents flow apart, then converge into a single stream. A partnership becomes something deeper. She paused, her stare rising to meet Elizabeth's. And the last. She turned the fifth card. The lovers. That's enough. Elizabeth's voice cut through the incense-thick air. We didn't come here for relationship advice. Nadira chuckled. Wait a minute, I said. Is she talking about us? Never mind who she's talking about, Elizabeth said. You've had your fun, Nadira. Now, a deal's a deal. The gypsy woman gathered the spread of cards with a sweep of her hand, shuffling them back into the deck. She set the deck aside and folded her hands on the table. You wish to know about the Eye of the Void and whoever stole it from Merrick Valoran. I can help you with this. My help, as always, comes with a price. We had a deal, Nadira, Elizabeth said, annoyed. I'm changing the terms, Nadira said, with no hint of apology in her tone. Elizabeth let out an exasperated breath and reached for her belt pouch. How much? Not coin. What then? A promise that when you've concluded your business with Mordecai, you will visit me again. Not for help, not for information, simply to visit. Her expression softened. An old woman grows lonely, and you have been absent too long. Guilt, or perhaps the recognition of a debt money couldn't pay, passed across Elizabeth's face. I promise, she said quietly. Nadira smiled, the knowing fortune-teller vanishing, replaced by the warmth of a grandmother pleased to see her granddaughter. Good. Bring your friend with you if you like. Nadira, Elizabeth said, her ire threatening to rise again. Still grinning, Nadira said, We should discuss business, no? Then the grin vanished, and the grandmother's warmth gave way to a gypsy's focus. She closed her eyes and drew a slow breath, her ringed fingers pressing flat against the table. The incense smoke curled around her, thickening, and the cluttered shop fell silent. When she spoke again, her voice carried a distinct quality, distant as if she heard words only she could hear. The Eye of the Void passed through many hands before reaching Valoran. It has a hunger, that artifact, a darkness that calls to those with darkness in their hearts. Her eyes opened, fixing on a point somewhere between Elizabeth and me. The person who stole it from Valoran's gallery is young, brash, a thief, but not of your guild, Elizabeth. He works alone, answering to no one, and he thinks himself cleverer than he is. A name? Elizabeth pressed. Finn. I shifted in my chair. This Finn have a last name? Just Finn, as far as anyone knows. He appeared in Alchester a few months ago, making a name for himself with bold scores and careless spending, the sort who steals a fortune on Monday and loses it at the dice tables by Friday. Elizabeth's lips pressed into a thin line. I've never heard of him. He avoids the guild, works outside your circles, but he's caused a stir in other quarters. Gambling halls, taverns where men with more ambition than sense gather to boast of their exploits. Nadira's dark gaze found mine. He's young enough to think himself immortal, and foolish enough to prove otherwise. Where do we find him? I asked. Rogue's Den. Brash is right, Elizabeth said. That's guild territory. I thought the entire city was guild territory, but I kept that to myself. He's taking an awful risk showing up there, Elizabeth went on. Unsanctioned thieves survive longer by not getting noticed. Nadira flexed her fingers. A recent job has him feeling emboldened. He spends, and loses, heavily there. She took on a sour look. Finding Finn is only the first step. Whoever hired him already has the eye. This person created the forgery. Finn will lead you to him if you are convincing enough. I can be pretty convincing when needed, I said without thinking. Elizabeth cast a sidelong glance my way, then she leaned forward. Who? That I cannot see clearly. The threads tangle when examined too closely, as if someone has taken pains to hide them. Nadira's fingers drummed on the table, her rings clicking softly. I see layers upon layers. This person does not intend to keep the eye for himself, but to sell it. I leaned as close as Elizabeth did. An intermediary? Nadira nodded. The buyer wants the eye for its power, not its value. And that should concern you both. Why? I asked. Our concern was the intermediary, not the person who hired him to acquire the artifact. Because idle men do not simply collect relics like the Eye of the Void. They acquire them to use them. Elizabeth shifted in her chair, uncomfortable. Why do I feel like you're no longer talking about the mysterious buyer? Nadira lifted a brow, but she said nothing. You know how this works, Nadira, Elizabeth said. People pay me to obtain things, not to ask what happens after I've handed those things off. What Mordecai does with the eye is his business. Nadira's mouth opened, a plethora of advice about seeking a new career and such about to spill forth, I imagined. But she thought better of it, because she shook her head and said, I give you this warning, Elizabeth, because you are dear to me. Whatever reason Mordecai has for wanting the eye, he does not intend to do anything good with it. That man collects power like a miser collects gold, hoarding it, never satisfied, always reaching for more. Be careful what you deliver to him. We've already accepted the job, I said. We can't walk away. I did not say walk away. I said to exercise caution. Nadira rose from her chair, her jewelry chiming with the motion. Find Finn, learn who hired him, and when you discover the truth, decide for yourselves whether Mordecai Solvane deserves what you're bringing him. Elizabeth stood, so I did as well. Thank you, Nadira. Thank me by keeping your promise. The old woman touched Elizabeth's cheek. And by staying alive. I have seen too many bright flames extinguished in this city. I do not want to see yours join them. I'll be careful, Elizabeth said. You never are. But Nadira smirked as she said it. Go, find your thief, and remember, the cards do not lie, even when we wish they did. Elizabeth's cheeks colored, but she said nothing. She slipped through the beaded curtain without looking back, and I followed her into the night, where the shambles embraced us once more. Narrow streets, leaning buildings, the smell of poverty and desperation. We strode in silence for a block before Elizabeth spoke. Rogue's Den. You know the place? Who doesn't? It's in Lowtown, that architectural blind spot where the city maps don't quite add up. That's the one. As I recall, the atmosphere lacks a certain charm. I can't remember when I was there last. I doubt it's changed since your last visit, still catering to people who'd prefer to remain unseen in more reputable establishments. Thieves, smugglers, the occasional murderer. She glanced at me. You'll fit right in. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't one, she said with a hint of a smirk. A block later, Elizabeth broke the silence again. About what happened back there, she said, not looking at me. The card reading. What about it? Don't read too much into it. She kicked a loose cobblestone, sending it skittering into the gutter. Nadira likes to stir the pot. It amuses her. I couldn't help but grin. The lover's card did make quite an impression. It's meaningless. Elizabeth's voice sharpened. Her predictions are wrong as often as they're right. Maybe more often. Last year she told a fence named Wix that he'd find true love before winter. He got stabbed by his mistress in an argument over a stolen necklace. Bled out in an alley not far from here. I grunted. That certainly doesn't sound like true love. She stopped. I'm serious. Whatever you're thinking, stop thinking it. We're working together because we have to, not because fate or destiny or some old woman's cards decreed it. When we finish this job, we go our separate ways. That's the deal. I held up my hands in a gesture of surrender. I wasn't thinking anything different. Good. Keep it that way. She started moving again, her boots striking the cobblestones with more force than necessary. The last thing I need is a killer with romantic notions. Romantic notions? We hardly know each other. Exactly. I fell into step beside her, not broaching the subject again until a block later. For what it's worth, I don't put much stock in fortune tellers anyway. Cards, crystal balls, reading tea leaves, it's all theater. People see what they want to see. Exactly. Some of the tension left her shoulders. I've seen Nadira do some things I can't explain, but the future isn't fixed. The cards show possibilities, not certainties. And that particular possibility, she shook her head. Let's just say it's never happening. Understood. I mean it. I held up my hands again. I said, understood. We walked in silence for another minute. As we neared the district's edge, the shambles gave way to streets of better quality. Gas lamps flickered to life as a lamplighter made his rounds ahead of us, pushing back the darkness one pool of light at a time. Elizabeth surveyed the sky, judging the hour by the moon's position. The den will be open by now. No sense waiting until tomorrow when our thief might decide to spend his coin elsewhere. Agreed. The sooner we find him, the sooner we finish this. And the sooner we go our separate ways. You keep mentioning that. Because I want to make sure we both remember it. She turned down a side street, heading in the direction of Lowtown. Come on. We have a bit of a walk ahead of us, but we can talk strategy on the way. Rogue's Den isn't the sort of place where you want to improvise. I followed her into the night, leaving the shambles and Madame Nadira's warnings behind. Ahead lay a gambling hall, a brash young thief, and answers we both needed. Chapter 5. Rogue's Den. Elizabeth led us through Lowtown's maze of narrow streets, turning down Shadowmark Alley where the buildings pressed so close they starved the cobblestones of moonlight. We descended Beggar's Stair, a flight of rough-hewn steps that emptied into a wider lane littered with vagrants, huddled beneath threadbare blankets. They watched us pass with desperate expressions but made no move to interfere. A tally of our weapons, and the way we carried ourselves, convinced them we weren't worth the trouble. Past the vagrants, harlots decorated our path ahead like ornaments on a tree, their painted faces catching what little light filtered down from the sky above. A few called out invitations, their voices carrying practiced warmth that fooled no one. Elizabeth ignored them. I did the same. One bolder than the rest stepped into my path with a smile that promised everything and delivered nothing. I sidestepped her without breaking stride. She let out a curse behind me, but I let it slide. Up the crooked steps we went. Then along Cutthroat Strip, a thin passage ending at a narrow door that most mistook for a storage closet or service entrance. Faint music seeped through the wood, accompanied by laughter, hollering, and the distinctive clatter of dice on a gaming table. Elizabeth rapped her knuckles against the door. 3 quick knocks, a pause, then 2 more. A speakeasy slid open, revealing a hard stare that scrutinized us with more suspicion than seemed warranted. "Evening," Elizabeth said. "We're here to lose some money." The stare traveled from her to me, lingering on the long knives at my hips and the sword over my shoulder. Rogue's Den had rules about such things. Weapons required peace-bounding upon entry, secured with leather straps that slowed drawing. The rule maintained the den's status as neutral ground, a place where Alchester's criminal factions conducted business without bloodshed. Breaking that peace brought swift consequences. "Weapons bound," the doorman said, not asking. Elizabeth produced a pair of leather ties from her belt and secured her throwing knives. I did the same with my long knives, though I left the sword untouched. The doorman's gaze narrowed. "The sword, too." "The sword stays as it is," I said. Weighing his options, the doorman decided I wasn't worth the argument and slammed the speakeasy shut. The door creaked open a heartbeat later. "'Cause trouble you deal with Barguest," he warned. "And Barguest doesn't deal gently." "Noted," I said, stepping past him into the den's smoky confines. The smell hit me first. Spilled ale, pipe smoke, leather oil, unwashed bodies, and beneath it all the distinctive metallic tang of hidden weapons. The peace-binding rule meant little to professionals who could slip a blade free in half a heartbeat, and Rogue's Den most definitely catered to professionals. We descended a rough-hewn staircase scarred by use into a sprawling underground chamber that had once served a grander purpose. Vaulted ceilings rose overhead, supported by pillars of smoke-blackened granite. Someone had told me the place had started life as a wine cellar for some noble family, before the plague swept through Alchester and erased their name from history. Looking at it now, with its mismatched furniture and amber-hazed lighting, you'd never guess the space once held anything as refined as wine. Tables and chairs crowded the main floor in an arrangement that suggested chaos, but actually provided clear sightlines to every exit. No two pieces of furniture matched. A velvet settee that might have graced a lord's parlor sat beside a crude bench constructed from split logs. An ornate card table with gilded legs stood alongside a rough-hewn plank balanced on barrels. The den's proprietor had acquired everything through questionable means, and he saw no reason to pretend otherwise. The bar ran the length of one wall, its surface a single slab of mahogany that had once served as a lord's banquet table. Knife marks and burn scars told the story of its descent from high society to this. Behind it stood an impressive collection of bottles and jugs, many bearing no tax stamps or sporting counterfeit seals. The bartender, a thick-necked woman with arms like kegs, moved between customers with practiced efficiency, pouring drinks and collecting coins without missing a beat. But it was the gaming tables that drew the crowd. Dice tables, card tables, wheels of fortune spinning with hypnotic regularity. The den offered every vice a criminal desired. The establishment's reputation for neutrality meant people conducted business here without fear of interference. Thieves planned heists in shadowed alcoves. Stolen goods changed hands over cups of ale. Information passed between parties who would knife each other anywhere else. The rules made it possible, and Barguest ensured everyone obeyed them. Speaking of the proprietor, I spotted him behind the bar, watching with the focused attention of a man who missed nothing. Massive didn't begin to describe him. He stood a full head taller than anyone else in the establishment, with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway and arms that suggested he could break a man in half without trying. A scar ran from his forehead to his jaw, passing through the ruin of his left eye. The scar's true origin remained a mystery, though rumors changed weekly. Some said he'd been a pirate captain. Others claimed he was an executioner who'd fled his liege's service. The truth probably lay somewhere darker. At his hip hung a club of impressive dimensions, a weapon he called persuasion, according to those who'd seen it used. The name seemed apt. Few arguments lasted long once Barguest entered the discussion. Elizabeth touched my arm and gestured toward the gaming tables. There. I followed her stare's direction past merchants betting fortunes they didn't have, past thieves counting stolen coins, past mercenaries drinking away earnings from jobs they'd rather forget. The dice tables sat in a cluster near the far wall, their green felt surfaces marred by countless rolls of bone and ivory. At one table, surrounded by hangers-on who laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, sat our quarry. Finn was younger than I'd expected. 19, maybe 20, with a once handsome appearance that arrogance had rendered less appealing. Dark hair fell across his forehead in artful disarray. His clothes were new and expensive, the sort of thing a man bought when he wanted everyone to know he had money to burn, or had just scored on a big job. Gold glittered at his fingers and throat, too much of it, displayed without taste or restraint. He held a cup in one hand and a fistful of dice in the other. His grin suggested he believed himself the cleverest man in the room. He was about to find out how wrong he was. He's not subtle about the spending, is he? I asked, more to myself than to Elizabeth. Thieves like Finn never are, she said, shaking her head. They pull one big score and suddenly think they're untouchable. She watched him throw the dice. His companions cheered when the roll came up in his favor. He's been winning. That'll make him cocky. More cocky than he already seems. Hard to imagine, I know. Elizabeth started toward the table, then paused. Let me do the talking first. If I can convince him we're not here to cause trouble, he might answer our questions without you having to get creative. And if he doesn't cooperate, then, like we talked about on the way over, you can get as creative as you like. A thin smile crossed her face. Within reason, we need him alive enough to talk. I'll try to restrain myself. We wove between tables and sidestepped the bartender carrying a tray of drinks. A few patrons looked our way. Professional curiosity, nothing more. The den's clientele knew better than to stare too long at strangers. You never knew who might take offense, and even in a place like this where few rules existed, offense sometimes proved fatal. Finn noticed us before we reached his table. I watched him cycle through recognition, alarm, and forced nonchalance in the span of a heartbeat. He knew who we were, or at least he knew enough to worry. Nothing like having one's reputation precede you. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying the practiced casualness of a man trying hard to seem unconcerned. "If it isn't Elizabeth West, we've never met, but I know you by reputation. The best thief in the city, or so they say. I don't doubt it's true. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Elizabeth slid the empty chair beside him out and sat down. "Evening, Finn. You're right, we've never met. But I know your name, too. I heard you've been having a run of luck lately and thought I might stop by to see what all the noise was about." Fortune favors the bold. He rattled the dice in his hand, a nervous gesture that undermined his confident smile. "Care to join the game? I'll have to warn you. The dice have been kind to me tonight. I'm not here to gamble." "Pity." His gaze slid past Elizabeth to me, standing behind her with arms folded. His alarm sharpened. "Who's your friend?" "Someone you don't want as an enemy." Finn's companions had gone quiet, sensing the shift in atmosphere. One by one, they found reasons to remove themselves from the table. A drink needed refilling, a woman caught their eye, or a card game beckoned from the den's other side. Within moments, Finn sat alone at the table, his winning streak forgotten. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "if this is about the merchant quarter job last month, I had nothing to do with it. Ask anyone." "I don't care about the merchant quarter." Elizabeth leaned forward, her expression hardening. "I care about the eye of the void." The color drained from Finn's cheeks. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't insult me." Elizabeth's voice carried a sharp edge. "You stole the eye from Merrick Valoran's vault before anyone else got to it. You replaced it with a forgery good enough to fool Valoran himself. And then you sold it to someone who paid you enough to fund your little gambling spree." She gestured at the coins piled on the table before him. "How am I doing so far?" Finn said nothing. His knuckles whitened around the dice. I stepped closer, letting my shadow fall across him. "The lady asked you a question." He swallowed hard. "I can't talk about this. Not here. You can talk about it here, or you can talk about it somewhere less comfortable." I kept my voice low, almost conversational. "Your choice." Elizabeth raised a hand, forestalling whatever threat I might have made next. "We're not here to cause trouble, Finn. We want information. Tell us who hired you and we'll leave. Nobody needs to know we had this conversation." "You don't understand." Finn's earlier bravado had evaporated entirely. "If I give up a client's name, I'm dead. That's how it works. You know that." "I know how it works for guild members," Elizabeth said. "But you're not guild, are you? You're operating without sanction in Thorn Targales's city. How long do you think that lasts once he finds out you're not showing him the proper respect?" Finn flinched at Thorn's name. Everyone in Alchester's underworld knew what happened to freelancers who tried to work without the guild's blessing. The lucky ones got run out of town. The unlucky ones became object lessons for others who might consider similar ambitions. Finn should have paid more attention before setting up shop here. "I didn't know," Finn said, his voice cracking. "I swear I didn't know the job would cause trouble. The man who hired me said it would be clean. In and out. No complications." "And yet here we are," I said. "I hate complications, don't you?" Elizabeth slid a small pouch from her belt across the table. Coins clinked within. "That's enough to get you out of Alchester tonight. A coach to one of the border towns. Further, if you're careful with your spending. Take the money, give us the name, and disappear. By morning, nobody will remember you were ever here." Finn stared at the pouch as if it might bite him. His outstretched hand trembled. "And if I don't?" "Then I stop being nice," Elizabeth said, "and my friend stops being patient." I let my hand drift closer to one of my peace-bound knives. Finn followed the movement, and what little color remained disappeared entirely. "Okay," he said. "Okay, fine, I'll tell you." He grabbed the pouch and clutched it to his chest like a talisman. "The man who hired me calls himself Varen Crost." The name emerged in a rush as if Finn couldn't wait to rid himself of it. People say he led a mercenary's life once, but he got tired of not getting paid enough, so he branched out, started acquiring and selling goods, expensive goods. He deals in rare artifacts for the sort of wealthy clients who don't ask where the merchandise comes from, if you know what I mean. Crost? I'd heard the name before, though I couldn't place where. What else can you tell us about him? Not much. We only met twice. Once when he hired me, once when I delivered the goods. He's older, maybe mid-40s, with a grizzled look about him. You know, like he's seen some shat. Dark hair, starting to gray. There's a rope scar across his throat. Finn touched his own neck unconsciously. Like someone tried to hang him once and didn't finish the job. Where do we find him? I don't know, he swallowed. I mean it. I don't know where he hangs out, but I overheard him mention something when I made the delivery. Finn's brow furrowed as he tried to recall. A gala at Lord Ashworth's mansion. He said he planned to attend tomorrow night to move the artifact during the party. Elizabeth shot me a glance. Lord Ashworth's gala was one of the social events of the season, an invitation-only affair that attracted the city's wealthiest and most influential citizens. If Crost planned to move the eye during the party, he was either supremely confident or extremely well-connected. Probably both. That's everything? Elizabeth pressed. You're sure? Finn nodded frantically. That's all I know, I swear. I stole the eye, delivered it to Crost, and that was the end of it. I didn't ask questions, didn't want to know. Elizabeth studied him, weighing his words against his obvious terror. Finally, she pushed away from the table and stood. Thank you for your cooperation, Finn. Now take the coin and get out of Alchester. Tonight. If I see your face in this city again, or even hear your name, I'll assume you've decided to test Thjorn's patience. She paused. Trust me, you don't want to do that. Finn didn't need to hear it again. He stuffed the pouch into his pocket, scooped up most of his winnings from the table, and fled without looking back. Within seconds, he'd vanished into the crowd, leaving an empty chair and the lingering smell of fear behind. I watched him go, then I took a seat at the table. Think he told us the truth? Mostly. Elizabeth retrieved an abandoned coin from the table and absently examined it. Lord Ashworth's gala, I said. I don't suppose you received an invitation, did you? Elizabeth smirked. No. But since when has that stopped people like us? Fair point. We have until tomorrow night to figure out how to get inside. Ashworth's security will be tight. With half the nobility in attendance, he'll have guards at every entrance. I know a few people who can help with that. So do I. Her smirk still played across her features. Seems we're stuck with each other for a little while longer. Seems like it. So, what's our next move? I asked. I need to talk to someone about getting us into that gala. Elizabeth paused, thinking. We don't have much time to plan this out, but I think I might have just the thing. Meet me tomorrow morning at the Lazy Minstrel, 10 o'clock. We'll compare notes and figure out our approach. And until then? Get some sleep. You look like you need it. I almost smiled. Is that concern I detect? Practical observation, but her expression softened. Don't read too much into it. Wouldn't dream of it. After we left Rogue's den together, she headed to wherever thieves went when they weren't stealing things. I watched her go until she disappeared around a corner, auburn hair catching the lamplight once more before the shadows claimed her. Then I turned in the opposite direction and headed for home. Chapter 6. The Gala. Wrought iron gates and white pillars topped with alchemical lanterns burning blue-white marked the entrance to the Ashworth estate. Our carriage stood in line with the others, waiting for Ashworth's guards to check our invitations and wave us through. When our turn came, our coachman handed our invitations to the guard, and, after a moment of scrutiny, we rolled onto the grounds. The drive curved through manicured gardens, lined on both sides by more alchemical lanterns set atop brass posts. Their light fell across sculpted hedges and ornamental trees, casting long shadows that shifted as we passed. Carriages of polished wood and brass trim with matched teams of horses formed a procession along the cobblestones, ending at the portico where footmen in household livery waited to assist passengers. One after another, each carriage stopped to disgorge its occupants, men in tailored coats and women in gowns that caught the light like jewels, all ascending the grand staircase as if offering wealth and pretension to some god. The mansion was 3 stories of smooth marble and tall windows, every pane aglow with the warm light of chandeliers shining from within. The architecture spoke of old money and older ambitions, the kind of family that measured success in generations rather than years. Elizabeth sat beside me in our hired carriage, her posture perfect, her features composed. She'd transformed herself for tonight's work, and the effect was remarkable. Gone was the thief in dark leather. In her place, a merchant's wife of evident refinement stood revealed. Her gown was deep burgundy, the fabric rich but not ostentatious, the cut flattering without being provocative. The bodice fit snug against her slender frame, the skirt full enough to move in, but not so voluminous as to impede quick action. She had swept her auburn hair into an elaborate arrangement that revealed the graceful line of her neck, with a few loose curls framing her face and softening her features. A simple gold necklace drew the eye downward, while matching earrings caught the carriage lamp's glow whenever she turned her head. She wore cosmetics, subtle touches that enhanced rather than concealed, making her already striking features even more breathtaking. I'd seen Elizabeth in thieving blacks, civilian clothes, and ready for a fight. But I hadn't expected this. "You're staring," she said without looking at me. "Observing. There's a difference." "Is there?" Now she did look, one eyebrow arching. "And what have you observed?" "That you make a convincing merchant's wife. You're not entirely out of place yourself." I'd dressed for the part as well. Dark coat over a dove-gray waistcoat, the fabric quality good but not special by any means. A vintner of moderate success, established enough to attend such functions but not wealthy enough to draw attention. I wore a white linen shirt with my cravat tied in a simple knot. My boots were polished but showed wear. I hid a thin blade along my forearm where the coat sleeve concealed it, and a second knife rested against my calf. Not much, but enough. The carriage slowed as we neared the portico. "Remember the plan," Elizabeth said, her voice dropping. "We're Aldrich and Margaret Montclair, married 3 years. You run a small but successful vineyard in the southern reaches of Pinehurst. I manage the business side, accounts, shipping, contracts." I remember. We'd settled on the RUSE together. While breaking and entering might prove faster, the level of security made it far riskier. Without adequate time to plan our entry and exit, and without knowing exactly where Crost may have secured the artifact, we rationalized that a more traditional approach to gaining access to Lord Ashworth's house seemed prudent. This more conservative plan allowed us to survey the interior in plain sight without raising suspicion. If we played our cards right, we might even secure the eye and leave the party with no one the wiser. You favor Cissian whites but appreciate a Thornfield red on occasion. You're in Alchester to establish relationships with local merchants and explore export opportunities. Margaret, she corrected. Margaret. I know the story. We spent all afternoon rehearsing it. Rehearsing and executing are 2 different things. She adjusted a glove, a nervous gesture she probably didn't realize she made. High society has its own rules. One wrong word, one misplaced reference, and we draw the wrong kind of attention. Blending in with high society is a specialty of mine, you know. We'll be fine. I hope so. Just don't kill anyone before dessert. But she smiled when she said it, so I grinned back at her. I'll do my best. The carriage rolled to a stop. A footman in Ashworth livery opened the door and helped Elizabeth descend with practiced courtesy. I followed, emerging into the cool night air and the soft murmur of arriving guests. The mansion loomed above us, larger than it had appeared from the drive. Columns flanked the entrance, carved from the same marble as the walls, supporting the portico where guards in formal uniforms stood at attention. I offered Elizabeth my arm. She took it, her fingers light on my sleeve, and we joined the flow of guests ascending the marble steps. "Smile," she murmured, You're not attending a funeral. Give it time, I murmured. She laughed, a bright social sound that carried far enough for nearby guests to notice. A woman playing her part, or a genuine reaction? I wanted to believe the latter. The greeter examined our invitations with appropriate scrutiny. The documents Elizabeth had requisitioned were excellent work. Genuine parchment, proper seals, names that appeared on the guest list because her forger had ensured it. Membership in the guild had its benefits. Mr. and Mrs. Montclair, the greeter announced, returning our invitations. Welcome to Lord Ashworth's Autumn Gala. The ballroom is through the main hall. You'll find refreshments available throughout the evening. Thank you, Elizabeth said, her voice laced with the cultured tone of a woman accustomed to such functions. We passed through the entrance into the grand foyer, and the full spectacle of Lord Ashworth's wealth revealed itself. The ceiling soared overhead, painted with scenes of classical mythology, gods and heroes frozen in poses of triumph and tragedy, their forms illuminated by the massive chandelier hanging at the room's center. Crystal pendants caught the gaslight and threw it in every direction, creating the impression of standing inside a jewel. The floor, marble veined with gold, was polished to a shine that reflected the guests crossing it like ghosts beneath their feet. Staircases curved upward on either side, their banisters carved from dark wood and topped with brass trim that gleamed like treasure. Servants in immaculate livery moved through the crowd, bearing trays of champagne and delicacies, their movements choreographed to appear effortless. The guests themselves represented a parade of wealth and influence. Nobles in their finery, merchants in their best approximation of it, military officers in dress uniforms heavy with medals and braid, women in gowns costing more than most families earned in a year, men in coats tailored to hide expanding waistlines and diminishing relevance. Everyone smiled, everyone laughed, everyone pretended the conversations they held mattered for something more than social positioning. Breathe, Elizabeth whispered. You're tensing up. I'm fine, I said, though I knew she was right. I told her I spent time in similar settings when the job required it. And I did. A master of infiltration and disguise. As good as any thief, I fancied myself. But right now, too many shades of a life lost, the one I might have had if the circumstances of my childhood had gone differently, presented themselves. I didn't lament that other life. What's done is done and all that, but that didn't mean that I didn't sometimes feel the jab of... What? Jealousy? No, not that, because I could have everything these people had and then some if I so chose. What then? Regret? As much as I hated to admit it, that was it. Regret over a life never realized. Sudden awareness of it was a bitter pill to swallow because assassins had a code about such things. You're not fine. You're scanning the place like you're planning an attack. I forced my shoulders to relax and made myself adopt the glazed expression of a man overwhelmed by grandeur rather than one lost in the past. Better, she said. Now, let's take a turn about the room. Stay sharp. We moved through the foyer into the ballroom beyond, Elizabeth guiding us with the easy confidence of someone who belonged here. She nodded to the other guests, offered brief smiles, and engaged in small talk with a baroness who complimented her gown. I played the attentive husband, speaking when spoken to, letting Elizabeth carry the social burden while I studied our surroundings. Lord Ashworth's security struck me as good, but not extraordinary. Guards at the main entrances, more stationed at the foot of each staircase, a few circulating through the crowd in civilian clothes. I spotted them by their posture, too alert, too watchful, their eyes ever roving. They monitored the upper floors, but none blocked access. Guests came and went, presumably to freshen up or escape the crush of the ballroom. A servant carrying empty glasses disappeared through a service door, the staff entrance leading to the kitchen. Excess defined the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, 3 of them, hung from a ceiling painted to resemble a summer sky, complete with clouds and birds frozen in eternal flight. Tall windows lined one wall, their heavy drapes drawn apart to reveal the darkened gardens beyond. A string quartet played in a corner, their music providing a backdrop to the dozens of conversations happening simultaneously. Tables laden with food and drink occupied the room's edges, while the center remained clear for dancing. And there, near the wine table, speaking with a cluster of well-dressed men, stood our quarry. Varen Crost. I recognized him from the description Finn had provided, though the young thief's words hadn't done justice to the reality. Mid-40s, lean and hard, with the sharp appearance of a man who'd spent his life in violence. Gray streaked his dark hair, and he kept it cropped short in a military style. His clothes were impeccable, better than most guests, in fact. But something about him didn't fit. He held himself with a coiled readiness. His attention wandered over the sea of guests, evaluating everyone and everything around him. And then there was the scar, a thick rope of tissue circling his throat, visible above his collar, impossible to miss once you saw it. The mark of a hanging survived, a reminder of what he'd endured and what he'd become. He looked exactly like what he was, a killer in gentleman's clothing. Not so different from myself. "I see him," Elizabeth murmured. "So do I. He's relaxed, socializing. He doesn't look like a man guarding something valuable. Which means the eye isn't on him. He hid it somewhere else in the mansion. The study, most likely, second floor. She'd done her reconnaissance earlier in the day while I gathered information from other sources. Between the two of us, we'd assembled a reasonable picture of the mansion's layout." "You sure?" I asked. "Of course I am. The study is a man's private domain where he feels safest and where he most often stores valuables of a transient nature. The eye is there, trust me." "Then that's where you need to go. After we've established ourselves. If we slip away too early, we'll draw attention." She steered us toward a passing servant, accepting 2 glasses of champagne with a gracious smile. She handed one to me. "Drink. Mingle. Look like you belong here. And Crost? Keep an eye on him. Once I'm gone, if he moves for the stairs, find some reason to delay him. Buy me as much time as you can so I can locate the artifact." We clinked glasses. "To a successful evening, darling." "To success," I agreed, and drank. We were about to separate when the music changed, and fate, that pesky phenomenon neither of us believed in, intervened. Chapter 7. The Dance. The string quartet shifted from background ambience to the purposeful melody of a waltz, its opening notes carrying across the ballroom with unmistakable intent. Around us, couples began moving to the dance floor. An older couple drifted into our orbit. The woman was perhaps 60, silver-haired and elegant, her gown a tasteful shade of blue that matched her husband's waistcoat. They had the comfortable air of people who'd been married so long they'd forgotten how to exist apart. The woman's gaze traveled from Elizabeth to me and back again, her smile warming with approval. "What a lovely couple you make," she said, her voice carrying the cultured tones of old money. "Don't they, Harold?" Her husband nodded, his expression genial. "Indeed. Reminds me of us 40 years ago, before my knees went bad and your patience wore thin." "My patience is fine," she said. "It's your hearing that's the problem." As her attention returned to us, her smile widened. "Surely you'll join the dance? It seems a shame to waste such a beautiful piece of music." Harold lightly shook his head. "Leave them alone, Martha. If they want to dance, they know where the dance floor is." "You hush, Harold," Martha fired back, but she hooked her arm around his like it belonged nowhere else. "As you said, they remind me of us once upon a time. I remember when you used to sweep me across the dance floor. Those were the times, weren't they?" Warming to the memory, Harold patted his wife's arm. "We sure made the lords and ladies blush, didn't we?" "More than once," Martha said, and the two laughed at the shared remembrance. We smiled with them, playing our roles, though what else could we do seeing them so enamored with each other? "I appreciate the suggestion," Elizabeth said. Her expression became apologetic. "But I'm not much of a dancer. 2 left feet, I'm afraid." "My wife is being modest," I said, seizing the opportunity before Elizabeth deflected further. I knew she wanted to stay focused on the work, but you know what they say about all work and no play. She dances beautifully. She simply doesn't like to admit it. Elizabeth shot a glance at me I ignored. Martha clapped in quick repetition to express her delight. Your husband knows the truth of it. Go on now. Dance while you're young enough to enjoy it. I offered Elizabeth my hand. Shall we, my dear? Her jaw tightened, but the older couple watched with such expectant warmth that refusing would have been churlish. She placed her hand in mine, her fingers cool against my palm. It seems I have no choice, she said, her voice sweet as poison, and her sharpened features doubly so. None whatsoever. I led her onto the dance floor, weaving between other couples until we found a space near the center. The music swelled around us, violins and cello weaving together in 3/4 time. I positioned my hand at the small of her back, felt her stiffen at the contact, then gradually relax as we began moving. Right away, I realized she had lied about her lack of proficiency. Elizabeth danced the way she did everything else, with grace and control, her movements fluid and sure. She followed my lead without resistance, anticipating the turns, matching my rhythm as if we'd practiced together for years. Her burgundy gown swirled with each rotation, and I caught traces of her perfume, rose and sandalwood, warm and unexpectedly soft for a woman whose livelihood involved slipping through shadows. You're a better dancer than I expected, she said, her voice pitched low so only I heard. You sound surprised. I assumed assassins spent all their time skulking in shadows, not learning ballroom etiquette. Skulking is a strong word. I prefer lurking. I guided her through a turn, her hand warm in mine. Besides, you'd be amazed at how many contracts require attending functions like this. Dancing is a useful skill. So is lying, apparently. You told that sweet old woman I was being modest. I drew her out of the turn, settling into the rhythm of the waltz. I told her nothing but the truth. You dance as if you were born to it. Not for the first time, her features flickered with surprise at the compliment, so much so that I felt compelled to say, It's amazing that a person with your skill and reputation has such an obvious fault. Oh? She lifted a brow, waiting for me to enlighten her. You sell yourself short at almost every turn. Is that all? Do tell. She matched my steps as we swept past another couple, her gown brushing my leg. I'm being serious. I mention your reputation as the best thief in the city, and you're genuinely surprised. I compliment your dancing, and you do the same. You probably don't even realize you're the most beautiful woman in the room this evening. That gave her pause before she said, Flattery will get you nowhere. But she couldn't hide the blush of her cheeks or her thin smile. I drew her closer as we navigated around an older gentleman who'd lost track of the tempo. Flattery? Merely observation, my dear. Well then. She let me guide her through another rotation, the chandeliers spinning overhead in a blur of crystal and light. You're very observant. The music carried us through another rotation. Around us, other couples moved in their own orbits, lost in conversation or comfortable silence. The chandeliers cast warm light across the dance floor, and in that microcosm of time, the ballroom felt smaller, more intimate, as if the crowd had faded to background noise. Elizabeth's grip softened on my shoulder. This isn't what I expected tonight. Dancing? Any of it. Her eyes met mine, and a quality I hadn't seen before lit her features. Not suspicion, not calculation, but a characteristic far more uncertain. Working with you, being here, pretending to. Before I could respond, the music slowed, the waltz approaching its final measures. Other couples slowed and drifted apart, moving toward the edges of the floor, but neither of us moved. We stood there, her hand still in mine, her other still resting on my shoulder, the space between us charged with subtle energy. We should, Elizabeth started to say. I know, but neither of us stepped away. Not yet. The last notes faded into silence. Applause scattered through the ballroom as guests acknowledged the quartet. The spell that had settled over us trembled, threatening to break. We separated, but our hands remained joined until we reached the edge of the dance floor. Once there, a floral arrangement in an elaborate vase attracted my attention. Roses, lilies, and a white flower I couldn't name, all artfully arranged. I plucked a single red rose from the display and offered it to Elizabeth. "For my wife," I said, "to commemorate our first dance." She stared at the flower, then at me. I thought she might refuse, might break character and remind me this was all pretense, that we were professionals with a job to do, that roses and dances meant nothing compared to stolen artifacts and dangerous adversaries. Instead, she took the rose. "How did you know?" she asked, her voice strange. "Know what?" "That roses are my favorite." I hadn't known, not exactly, but her stare lingering on the arrangements earlier gave a hint. Another was her fragrance, the rose scent evident from the moment the evening had started. I mentioned none of that to her, but said with a whimsical smile, "A husband knows these things." Elizabeth looked at the rose in her hand, then her eyes lifted to meet mine. Her professional mask remained in place, but cracks appeared, revealing glimpses of the woman beneath. "Time to get to work," she said softly. "Time to get to work," I agreed. She tucked the rose into her bodice, where it rested against the burgundy fabric like a drop of blood, and headed for the stairs. I watched her go, following her progress through the crowd until she reached the base of the staircase. The guard posted there gave her a cursory glance and stepped aside. Elizabeth ascended without looking back. I turned toward the wine table and crossed. The mercenary stood where I'd last seen him, holding court with a small group of admirers. Straightening my coat, I adopted the eagerness of a provincial vintner, hoping to make connections, and got ready to do my part. Chapter 8. The Acquisitions Specialist. Approaching Mr. Crost directly would seem too eager. Better to let the meeting appear natural. So I moved closer to the wine, positioning myself within earshot while I examined the selection. Ashworth spared no expense when it came to impressing his guests. Bottles from across the 4 fiefdoms lined the white-clothed surface, their labels promising vintages that cost most men a month's wages. I positioned myself at the table's far end, where I examined the offerings while keeping Crost in view. He stood perhaps 10 feet away, finishing a conversation with a portly gentleman who barked out a laugh at whatever Crost had said. The mercenary maintained a pleasant but distant demeanor, wearing the practiced smile of a man enduring tedium for the sake of appearances. His gaze flicked toward me, noted my presence, then returned to his companion. Once I had the sommelier's attention, I gestured at a bottle of Thornfield Red. The server held the bottle up so I could examine the label. "The 22 Thornfield Estate Reserve," he said, nodding appreciatively. "An excellent choice for the occasion, sir." 522 was the year of the late frost, I said. It reduced that season's yield by half, but the grapes that survived produced exceptional fruit. I watched as he poured. The liquid caught the light with a deep garnet hue, a sign of proper aging. I swirled the glass, watching the tears run slowly and evenly down the sides, then brought it to my nose. I detected black cherry, a hint of oak, and an earthy undertone from the rich soil that made the Thornfield vineyards famous. The first sip confirmed what my nose had promised, dry but not austere, with enough tannin remaining to suggest it had years left if properly cellared. Most hosts served it too young. Ashworth, whatever his other faults, had the sense to let his wines mature. I made an appreciatively loud noise. Crost glanced over again, his attention lingering. The portly gentleman excused himself, leaving Crost momentarily alone. I seized the opportunity. "The 22 Thornfield," I said, raising my glass in acknowledgement. "A good year, though I find it lacks the complexity of the 18. Crost's eyebrow rose a fraction. "You know your wines." "I should hope so, given it's my trade." I closed the distance separating us and extended my hand. Aldrich Montclair. His grip was firm, controlled, the handshake of a man accustomed to taking measure of others through such contact. I matched it, triggering recognition that I was more than a soft merchant. "Varen Crost," he said. "A pleasure." "Likewise." I gestured at the wine selection. "Are you familiar with the southern vintages, Mr. Crost? The Thornfield estate has produced some remarkable bottles over the years." The sommelier noticed Varen's interest and poured him a glass. He swirled the wine with the practiced motion of someone who'd done it before, then raised it to his nose. "Notes of blackcurrant," he said. "Oak, obviously, and brandy, perhaps." "Very good. Most people miss the brandy. The flavor comes from the aging process. They use barrels that previously held Cicean brandy. The wood retains traces of the original spirit." "Interesting?" He took a sip, considered, then nodded. "I taste it now, subtle but present. How is it you're such an expert on Thornfield wines?" "I try to learn as much as I can about my rivals," I said, not attempting to disguise the double meaning. "Montclair grapes are not yet on the same scale as Thornfield's, but I hope to grow our vineyard over the coming years to become a larger player in the industry." We discussed wine for several more minutes, terroir and soil composition, the effects of rainfall on grape quality, and the merits of different aging techniques. Crost proved more knowledgeable than I'd expected, holding his own in a conversation that would have lost most within the first exchange. He had refined tastes, this mercenary. A man who appreciated the finer things, even as he made his living through violence. Qualities that made us more similar than different. Beneath the surface, we circled each other like wolves testing boundaries. Every question he asked carried weight, probing for inconsistencies in my story. Every answer I gave, while true, revealed nothing useful. Each of us knew how to extract information while protecting our own secrets. "Do you reside here in Alchester, Mr. Montclair?" "I'm afraid not. Visiting from Pinehurst, actually. I hope to establish relationships with local distributors while I'm here." "A long way to travel for business." "People build the best relationships in person, don't you think? Letters and intermediaries have their place, but there's no substitute for sharing a glass of wine with a potential partner." Shifting the topic, Varen said, "I noticed you dancing earlier. Your wife?" "Margaret, yes, my partner in business and in life. She manages the commercial side of our operation, contracts, distribution, client relationships. I grow the grapes and produce the wine. She makes certain we actually profit from it. A fortunate arrangement." "I'm a fortunate man." The words contained more warmth and sincerity than I'd intended. Crost noticed. I saw it in the slight tilt of his head, how he studied me with renewed interest. The emotion helped sell my ruse, so I offered no apologies. "She's quite beautiful," he said. "Your wife?" "She is." We sipped our wine. I checked the time, noting Elizabeth had been gone long enough to reach the study, but not long enough to search it thoroughly and return. I needed to keep Crost engaged longer. "Lord Ashworth has quite the collection, I understand," I said. "Art, antiquities, rare artifacts. Are you a collector yourself, Mr. Crost?" Varen weighed the question before answering. "I acquire things, for others mostly." "An acquisition specialist, then?" "Something like that." He took another sip of wine, his gaze never leaving mine. "It's a competitive field, demanding clients, tight deadlines, the occasional complication." "Complications?" "Rival collectors, security measures, people who believe possession is 9/10 of the law." His lips almost curved into a smile. "The work requires a certain flexibility." "I can imagine." We stood in silence, two men who understood each other better than either was ready to admit. Crost knew I was more than a vintner. I saw it in the way he held himself, the subtle tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there at the start of our conversation, and I knew he was far more than an acquisition specialist. But neither of us was ready to drop the pretense. Not yet. "Tell me, Mr. Montclair," Crost said, "how long do you plan to remain in Alchester?" "A few weeks, perhaps. Long enough to establish the relationships I mentioned. My wife has been eager to explore the city's cultural offerings, the museums, the theaters." I paused, watching his reaction. She has a particular interest in antiquities. Crost's expression didn't change, but something hardened behind his cold stare. A woman of refined taste. The string quartet launched into a new piece, and the conversation lulled. I scanned the ballroom, searching for any sign of Elizabeth descending the stairs. Nothing yet. Either she still searched the study or she'd encountered complications of her own. I found neither possibility comforting. "You're an interesting man, Mr. Montclair," Crost said, drawing my attention. "Not quite what I expected from a provincial vintner." "Is that so? Perhaps if we encounter each other again, we can continue our conversation. For now, though, I'm afraid I must take my leave. I have a client who expects delivery at a specific time, and I never let a client down. I'm sure you understand." "Of course," I said, thinking of some way to stall him further when a commotion near the stairs interrupted whatever he might have said next. Gasps first, then a woman's scream. At the top of the stairs, two figures locked together in a violent struggle burst into view. They crashed against the banister, grappling for position, and the gaslight caught a flash of steel, knives slashing in vicious arcs. Elizabeth. She twisted away from her adversary's blade, barely avoiding it, and drove her elbow into her attacker's ribs. The other woman, lean, dark-haired, moving with the brutal efficiency of a trained killer, absorbed the blow and pressed forward, forcing Elizabeth closer to the precipice. They fought in savage silence while the ballroom erupted into chaos below them. Crost went rigid beside me. "It seems, Mr. Montclair, that your wife is also not what I expected." Without another word, he started toward the commotion. I moved to block him. The masks finally fell away. "You've come for the eye. That's a mistake, Mr. Montclair. My employers are not ones to trifle with, and neither am I." He charged with fists swinging. Chapter 9. The Eye of the Void. Elizabeth ascended the stairs with the unhurried grace of a woman seeking the powder room. She nodded to a servant carrying empty champagne flutes and offered a polite smile to an elderly gentleman descending past her, keeping her pace measured even as her pulse quickened. The guard at the base of the staircase had barely spared her a glance. Just another guest and another pretty face in a pretty gown. As she reached the second-floor landing, the noise from the ballroom faded, replaced by the muted sounds of distant conversation and the soft hiss of gas lamps. Corridors stretched to either side, each lined with oil paintings and decorative tables bearing flower arrangements. She peered left, spotting 3 doors on one side, 2 on the other, and a sharp turn at the end leading to other chambers and Ashworth's study. Elizabeth swept down the hall, the sound of her heels moderated by the plush rugs laid across the wooden floor. She passed the first door, the second, wondering about guards or servants. She had expected at least a guard present to watch over the eye and whatever other valuables the Lord kept up here, but she saw none. Ashworth focused his security on the ground floor, not considering anyone might slip away from the Gala to rifle through his belongings. His mistake. Around the corner, the study door announced its importance, with its heavy oak construction and polished brass bands. Elizabeth pressed her ear to it. Silence. She tried the handle. Locked, of course. So she withdrew her picks from a hidden pocket sewn into her dress and got to work. The lock was better than most household mechanisms, but nothing special. She'd cracked harder ones in worse conditions. 20 seconds later, the tumblers clicked into place. She eased the door open, slipped inside, and shut it behind her. The study was everything she'd expected from a noble with expensive tastes. Rich furnishings in dark wood and leather, bookshelves lining 3 walls, filled with volumes that looked more decorative than read. A massive desk dominated the room's center, its surface cluttered with papers and correspondence. Above the fireplace hung a portrait of Lord Ashworth himself, painted in a pose meant to convey authority and wisdom. Elizabeth smirked because it conveyed neither. A low fire smoldered in the fireplace, kept that way by a servant in case Ashworth visited here before retiring. Other than that, darkness, lightened by sparse moonlight filtering through a window, bathed the study. Her gaze swept the room, cataloging and dismissing. The desk drawers might hold secrets, but not the kind she sought. Thinking the bookshelves might conceal a safe, she was about to start searching when a more obvious alternative presented itself. A lockbox bolted to a side table near the window. Ornate but sturdy, the kind of container designed to resist casual theft. Exactly where an acquisition specialist might temporarily secure a valuable asset they intended to move soon. She crossed the room and examined the lock. More sophisticated than the door, multiple tumblers, a false mechanism designed to trap inexperienced picks. Whoever had designed it knew their craft. Elizabeth respected that, even as she set about defeating it. The tumblers resisted her first probe. She adjusted her angle, felt for the tension points, and worked them one by one. The process required patience, which she possessed in abundance when a prize waited on the other side. Seconds stretched into a minute, then two. A bead of sweat slid down her spine despite the cool air. The final tumbler gave way with a satisfying click. Elizabeth lifted the lid, and there it was. The Eye of the Void, the real one this time. "This damn well better be the real one this time," she muttered to herself. Nestled in a bed of velvet, the crystal was darker than the darkest night. Moonlight bent toward it, sliding across the faceted surface before vanishing entirely. Cold radiated from it, despite the fire burning low in the hearth. Elizabeth reached for it. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." She froze, her fingers inches from the crystal. A woman's voice, cold and confident, sounded behind her. Elizabeth hadn't heard the door open, hadn't heard footsteps on the carpet. She turned, keeping her hands visible. The woman stood in the doorway, bathed in light from the hallway. Lean and compact, her servant's attire didn't match her killer's stance. 2 knives gleamed, ready for quick work. Her features were plain, unremarkable, her face the sort that blended into crowds and faded from memory shortly after seeing it. But her eyes were anything but forgettable. Dark and sharp, they studied Elizabeth with the cold assessment of someone calculating how long it would take to close the distance between them. An amulet hung at her throat, catching the lamplight with a faint gleam. "You must be the thief who stole the forgery," the woman said, smirking. "I wondered if you'd make a play for the real thing." Elizabeth straightened, letting her arms fall to her sides. The knife strapped to her thigh felt very far away. "And you must be the reason I didn't see any guards." Elizabeth remembered passing the woman on the stairs, unassuming, blending in, and watching for someone like her to make a move for the artifact. "Name's Senna." The smile widened without warming. "Not that it matters. You won't be using it for long." The amulet at her throat flared with sudden light, and Senna attacked without warning. 1 second, she stood in the doorway. The next, she became a blur of motion, crossing the study faster than any normal person could move. Elizabeth threw herself sideways by instinct alone, twin blades slicing the air inches from her throat. She hit the carpet rolling, came up near the desk, and lifted the first object she found, a heavy brass paperweight shaped like a lion. Senna already spun toward her, knives singing through the air, that inhuman speed carrying her forward like a diving hawk. Elizabeth hurled the paperweight. It caught Senna in the shoulder, disrupting her attack enough for Elizabeth to scramble behind the desk. Not much of a barrier, but better than nothing. Her mind raced. The amulet had flared before the burst of speed. Magic, obviously. But magic had limits. The woman circled the desk, moving normally now and not speeding around it. Elizabeth wasn't sure what that meant, but she needed to figure it out fast. Senna rolled her shoulder where the paperweight had struck. "Most people don't react fast enough to see me coming. You might actually make this interesting." Senna bounded across the desk, knives leading. Elizabeth shoved the chair into her path, buying a half-second to dart toward the bookshelves. She lifted a heavy tome that she swung like a club, forcing Senna to dodge rather than press her advantage. The study became a battlefield of improvised weapons. Elizabeth grabbed whatever she could reach, books, a candlestick, a small bust of some forgotten philosopher, throwing, swinging, doing anything to keep distance between herself and those flashing blades. Senna fought dirty and without hesitation, aiming for eyes, throat, and joints. She was smaller than Elizabeth, but faster, more vicious, and she talked constantly. "Pretty dress," Senna said, ducking a thrown vase. "Shame about the blood stains you're about to add to it." Elizabeth didn't waste breath on replies. She needed to get to the eye, needed to get out of here before the noise drew attention, before guards arrived, before this situation spiraled further out of control, before she wound up dead. The amulet flared again. Senna became a blur, knives carving the air in patterns Elizabeth couldn't follow. She hurled herself behind a leather armchair, felt it shudder as blades punched through the upholstery inches from her face. The burst ended, and Elizabeth sprang up, her knife drawn and ready, driving Senna back. "That's a neat trick," Elizabeth said. She counted 90 seconds between bursts, 90 seconds in which her adversary was vulnerable, or at least not moving like a lightning bolt. "The amulet a gift from your employer?" Senna's gaze narrowed, a sore spot apparently. "Earned, not given. Everything I have, I earned. Someone like you wouldn't—" Elizabeth spun around, hurling her knife with all her momentum behind it. A second after, she sprang for the lockbox, scooping up the eye. Stuffing it down her bodice, she kicked off her heels and drew her second knife, ready to fight her way out if necessary. It was most definitely necessary. Having dodged her throw, Senna approached low and fast now. One blade slashed at Elizabeth's knife hand while the other drove toward her stomach. Elizabeth twisted, deflecting the first strike and sucking in her gut to avoid the second. Steel scraped against steel and they broke apart, circling. Senna grinned. The expression did her appearance no favors. "You're better than I expected. Not just another pretty face, are you? Has anyone ever told you that you talk too much?" Elizabeth feinted left, then aimed a kick at Senna's knee. The move was a dirty one, but this was dirty fighting. Senna saw it coming and pivoted, but the movement opened her guard for a half-second. Elizabeth's blade licked out, scoring a shallow cut across Senna's forearm. First blood was hers. Senna glanced at the wound, then sneered at Elizabeth. "That's the spirit." She attacked with renewed fury, knives weaving a deadly pattern. Elizabeth parried and dodged, giving ground toward the fireplace. When her foot touched the brass fender, she grabbed the poker from its stand, bringing it up to block a thrust aimed at her throat. "Two weapons?" Senna laughed. "Won't help." The poker gave Elizabeth reach that the knife lacked. She swept it low, forcing Senna to jump back, then reversed into an overhead strike. Sparks flew where metal met metal. Elizabeth pressed the attack, driving Senna toward the bookshelves, using the poker's length to keep her darting knives at bay. Senna's back hit the shelves. Books tumbled around her as she deflected another strike, but Elizabeth saw an opening and was about to thrust with her knife when the amulet flared. Senna blurred sideways, impossibly fast, appearing behind Elizabeth with her blades sweeping toward her spine. Elizabeth dropped flat, felt the knife whisper through her hair, and rolled sideways across the carpet. She sprang up near the desk, breathing hard, the eye digging into her skin beneath her dress. 70 seconds until the next burst. Maybe less. "Getting tired?" Senna asked, not even winded. "That gown must be hell to fight in, all that fabric, those tight stays, whereas I—" She spread her arms, showing off her servant's attire, dressed for the occasion. Too busy calculating the time to reach the door, Elizabeth said nothing. Senna stood between her and the exit, but the woman bled now, and her last burst had been shorter than the first. The amulet had limits. Everything had limits. She threw the poker. As Senna ducked, Elizabeth vaulted over the desk in a flurry of burgundy silk. She hit the carpet on the other side and drove her knee into Senna's midsection before the woman recovered. They crashed into the bookshelves together, volumes raining down around them. Elizabeth slammed her elbow into Senna's right hand, smashing it against the shelves. One blade clattered to the floor. Senna snarled and raked her remaining knife at Elizabeth's face. Elizabeth caught her wrist, twisted, and they grappled against the shelves, each fighting for control with the eye pressed between them. "Give it up," Senna hissed. "You can't beat me." Elizabeth drove her forehead into Senna's nose. Cartilage crunched. Senna howled and stumbled on her heels, blood streaming. Elizabeth sprinted for the door. She made it 3 steps before Senna's thrown blade buried itself in the doorframe inches from her head. "Where you going, beautiful?" Senna asked, her voice thick with blood and fury. "We're not done. Not by a long shot." Elizabeth yanked open the door and leaped into the corridor. Behind her, the amulet flared. Before she could react, Senna's blade caught her across the ribs, a cut that sliced through her dress and burned like fire. Elizabeth grasped a wall sconce, tore it free from its mounting, and swung it at Senna's head with everything she had. The metal connected with a satisfying crack, sending Senna stumbling. Elizabeth took 3 steps before the pain in her side forced her to stop. Her hand went to her side, coming away bloody. "Now you're making me angry," Senna said from behind her, blood trickling from her hairline. Gritting her teeth against the pain, Elizabeth reminded herself she'd dealt with worse as she stumbled for the steps. The sounds of the gala rose from below. Music, conversation, laughter. About to become screams, some part of Elizabeth's mind thought. She saw the ballroom through the banister rails, the guests in their finery, and the chandeliers casting their warm light over everything. Senna attacked again, driving her closer to the staircase with a flurry of slashes. Elizabeth parried with her knife, slowed by her wound but still able to block and dodge even though she gave ground. The top of the stairs loomed behind her, the drop to the ballroom floor waiting if she lost her footing. They grappled on the landing, locked together. Elizabeth balled up her fist and cracked Senna across the jaw, sending her opponent reeling. Senna cursed, and Elizabeth twisted free. Undeterred, Senna rushed in again, slashing. Elizabeth sidestepped, spinning to slam her elbow into Senna's ribs, but her foot caught on the hem of her gown. Her balance shifted, and they both tumbled down the stairs in a chaotic display of steel and burgundy fabric. This is not exactly going as planned, but when does it ever? The world became a spinning blur of marble steps, flailing limbs, and sharp impacts. Elizabeth lost her knife somewhere in the first rotation. Senna's remaining blade went next, wrenched free when they struck the banister hard enough to crack the wood. They rolled together, neither willing to let go, fists replacing the knives they'd lost even as the stairs battered them from every angle. An elbow caught Elizabeth in the cheek. She answered with a knee to Senna's stomach. They tumbled past the halfway point, drawing screams from the guests below. The ballroom rushed up to meet them in a wash of gaslight and terrified faces. The marble floor arrived with brutal finality. Elizabeth hit hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Senna landed beside her, equally stunned, but recovered first, scrambling to her knees and swinging a wild punch at Elizabeth's head. Elizabeth rolled with the blow, rose to a knee, and caught Senna's next strike on her forearm. Elizabeth caught glimpses of horror, guards pushing through the crowd, and chaos spreading through what had been an elegant gathering right before Senna lunged at her again. Ducking under the attack, Elizabeth pivoted and drove her fist into Senna's jaw with every ounce of strength she had left. The impact traveled up her arm like fire. Senna's head snapped back, her eyes rolled white, and finally, she crumpled to the marble floor. Elizabeth rose, standing over her fallen opponent with her chest heaving and blood dripping from a multitude of cuts. Her gown was torn and blood-stained. Her hair had come loose from its elaborate arrangement, hanging in sweat-dampened tangles. Her side burned with pain, but she'd won. She felt for the eye, expecting to feel its weight right where she'd secured it. But she found nothing but torn fabric. Damn it! Elizabeth scanned the floor, the stairs, the scattered debris of their battle. There, halfway across the ballroom floor, stark against the white marble, the eye of the void had slipped free during their tumble, and now it sat in plain view, drinking the lamplight, waiting for someone to claim it. Elizabeth started toward it, but her legs nearly buckled. The fight had taken more out of her than she realized. Blood loss, the slash in her side, the sheer exhaustion of battling an opponent with magical speed. It all caught up with her at once. But she forced herself to move. She wasn't leaving without that eye. Chapter 10. The Exchange. Varen's first punch would have crushed my windpipe if it had landed. I slipped left, letting his fist whistle past my ear and jabbed at his ribs. He blocked with his forearm and countered with a knee. We separated, circled, and crashed together in a flurry of strikes that sent nearby guests scrambling. Around us, the ballroom erupted into pandemonium. Women screamed, men shouted. The string quartet abandoned their instruments mid-note, fleeing with everyone else toward the exits. I caught glimpses of the chaos in my peripheral vision, Elizabeth and her opponent tumbling down the stairs in a tangle of limbs, Lord Ashworth bellowing for guards, champagne glasses shattering on the marble floor. But I couldn't afford to look away from Crost. The man fought like a trained killer. He'd learned his craft in proper battles, fighting real opponents, and it showed. His stance shifted smoothly from offense to defense, his weight always balanced, his guard never dropping. When I feinted high and struck low, he read it and countered. When he drove at me with a combination, I had no choice but to dodge and no chance of countering. Not above improvising when necessary, I lifted a wine bottle from an abandoned table and swung it at his head. He ducked, delivered a punch to my stomach, and followed with a hook that I deflected. "Not bad," he said, "for a vintner." "Not bad yourself." I spat blood from a split lip. "For an acquisitions specialist." Two of Ashworth's guards pushed through the crowd, swords drawn, shouting for us to stop. I didn't question the opportunity, catching the nearest guard's sword arm and twisting to relieve him of his weapon before he understood what happened. Crost did the same to his man, a brutal elbow to the face preceding the disarmament. His guard crumpled. Mine ran to find another weapon. We turned toward each other, small swords in hand. In the next instant, steel rang against steel. Crost attacked with controlled fury, his blade probing my defenses, searching for weaknesses. I parried, riposted, gave ground when I had to, and pressed forward when possible. The borrowed sword felt wrong in my hand. Too light, poorly balanced, but I was an expert in all forms of blades, so adapting was nothing. Guests fled past us in waves, their screams providing a discordant melody to our battle. Crost lunged, a feint that became a thrust when I committed to the parry. The blade scored a line across my arm, shallow, but it burned. I answered with a slash that opened his coat and scraped against something solid beneath, armor woven into his clothing. Of course, a man like Crost would have contingencies in place. We broke apart, breathing harder now. Blood dripped from my arm onto the marble floor. Across the ballroom, Elizabeth rose from the bottom of the stairs. Her opponent lay crumpled and unconscious beside her. Elizabeth's gown looked a shambles, her face bruised, but she was alive and, I hoped, had possession of the artifact for all her troubles. Crost followed my gaze, his demeanor shifted. "The eye," he breathed. I spotted it too. The dark crystal lying on the marble floor halfway across the ballroom, glinting with that wrongness that swallowed light. The artifact must have fallen loose during Elizabeth's tumble down the stairs. Varen moved, grabbing a fleeing woman, some merchant's wife in silk and pearls, and hurled her into my path. By the time I shoved her aside, he'd already crossed half the distance to the eye. "Elizabeth!" I shouted. She saw him coming, tried to intercept. But the fight had taken its toll. Crost scooped up the eye without breaking stride, the crystal vanishing into his coat as he ran. Not toward the exit, but toward the stairs. I sprinted after him. Elizabeth fell in beside me despite the blood, difficult to see against the burgundy fabric, soaking through her ruined gown. In a hurry, Crost took the stairs 3 at a time. We followed, Elizabeth with gritted teeth, leaving the ballroom chaos behind. "You all right? You look like hell." "I'm fine," Elizabeth said, but she held tight to her side. "Where's he going?" "To make his exchange," I said. "To deliver the eye to his employer." The second-floor corridors stretched before us. Crost's hurried footsteps echoed from the one opposite the study. "Go," Elizabeth said. "I'll follow." I didn't argue, running down the hall after Crost, who slipped through a heavy door at the far end. Before he closed and barred it, I closed the distance and slammed into it, blasting it open. What I saw inside brought me up short. Light shone, not lamplight, but a pulsing, swirling myriad of colors. I stood in a circular chamber, its walls lined with arcane symbols. At the center stood a circular frame of dark metal set with crystals that blazed with unnatural radiance. Within the frame, I expected to see a painting, a mirror, or even the wall behind it. Instead, a swirling vortex of light revealed a vision or some other reality beyond. A dark chamber, stone walls, guttering torches, dark shapes that moved in the background. At the center, a figure draped in shadow. Varen stood before the portal, the eye in his hand. Next to him, a mechanical device with levers and knobs rested upon a pedestal. He raised the artifact, its darkness visible against the portal's swirling light. In response, the figure on the portal's other side raised an arm, and a hand emerged on our side, the fingers dark-skinned with the palm held upward, waiting to receive the eye of the void. Crost glanced my way before he returned his attention to the person on the other side of the portal. As promised, the eye of the void. He stepped forward, ready to deliver it. I didn't give him the chance. Covering the distance between us faster than he expected, I snatched the eye from him in one smooth motion, my fingers closing around that cold, wrong crystal even as I spun around, delivering a kick that sent him hurtling through the portal. I glimpsed his face as he crossed the threshold. Shock, fury, the dawning realization of failure. He landed hard on the distant stone floor, the robed figure recoiling in alarm, both staring back through the portal at the prize they had let slip through their fingers. "The eye!" Crost cried out, scrambling to his feet. Somehow I heard him even though he was now a world away. "Give me—" Behind me, Elizabeth cracked her knife hilt into the device on the pedestal, smashing it once, twice, and a third time until it fell into pieces. The portal convulsed, its swirling energies collapsing inward like water down a drain. I heard Crost shout, a curse, a threat, it didn't matter. And then the gateway snapped shut. Silence gripped the chamber. Elizabeth pressed a hand to her wounded side, her breathing ragged. "We should go," she said, "before Ashworth or his guards find us in here." I offered her my arm. She took it without question or protest, straightening with visible effort. "Let's find another way out. I'd rather not explain all this to a room full of hysterical nobles." We traversed servant passages, keeping our heads down and hoping we didn't run into anyone of authority or importance. I heard shouts from another part of the house, but then we were outside, hailing a nearby coach from the line waiting for departing guests. "Oh," Elizabeth said next to me, sounding disappointed. Our coach was nearly here, and we couldn't afford any more mischief. "What's wrong?" I asked her. "Your rose," she said, holding up the smashed flower, now devoid of half its petals. "It's ruined." But I noticed she didn't let go of it. "We'll find another, my dear." She let out a tiny laugh that she quickly stifled. "That hurts." Once we boarded the carriage, I gave the coachman instructions, and we lurched away, leaving Lord Ashworth's estate behind. Chapter 11. The Aftermath. I watched the mansion's lights recede through the carriage's small window until the familiar darkness of Alchester's streets replaced them. Gas lamps flickered past at irregular intervals, casting brief orange flashes across the interior before plunging us back into shadow. Elizabeth sat across from me, one hand still pressed to her side where the other woman's blade had scored deep. Her ruined gown hung in tatters, the burgundy fabric dark with blood in places. Her hair had come undone, hanging in damp tangles around a face that bore the evidence of combat. A bruise spreading across her cheek, a split lip, and more minor cuts along her jaw. She still clung to the rose. The adrenaline that had carried us through the fight faded, leaving behind the aches and pains we'd ignored in the heat of battle. My arm stung where Crost's blade had caught me. My lip throbbed. But Elizabeth had it worse. "Let me see," I said. She started to protest, then thought better of it as she lifted her arm. The cut ran along her ribs, deep enough that the surrounding fabric glistened wet in the dim light. Too deep for a simple bandage. I produced a handkerchief from my pocket and a small flask from inside my coat. "This will sting," I told her. "I've had worse." I wet the cloth with brandy. She smelled the alcohol and, not asking, took the flask from my hand. She drank deeply before nodding for me to go ahead. When I pressed the handkerchief to the wound, she hissed between her teeth but didn't pull away, her jaw tight and gaze fixed on some point past my shoulder. I cleaned the cut and assessed the damage with the care of a healer. The bleeding had slowed but hadn't stopped. "You need stitches," I said. "I figured as much." I rapped on the coach's ceiling and gave the driver new directions. A physician I knew in the merchant quarter, a man who treated injuries without asking questions. The coach changed course, wheels rattling over cobblestones as we turned onto a quieter street. Meanwhile, I continued tending to her other injuries, the bruise on her cheek, the smaller cuts on her arms. I moved with care, cleaning each wound. Elizabeth sat motionless through it all, her breathing shallow, her gaze drifting to the window and the passing shadows beyond. "You've done this before," she said. "Mostly to myself," I said. "You're my first patient." The coach stopped outside a modest townhouse, its windows dark except for a lamp burning in the front room. I helped Elizabeth down, supporting her weight as we climbed the steps and knocked. The physician, a gray-haired man named Harwick, who'd patched me up more often than I cared to admit, answered in his dressing gown, took one look at Elizabeth's condition, and ushered us inside without a word. He worked quickly and efficiently, numbing the wound with an ether-smelling ointment before closing it with neat, precise stitches. Elizabeth bore the procedure in silence, her only concession to the pain a whitening of her knuckles, where she gripped the chair's arm. Harwick applied a bandage, pressed a small medicinal bottle into my hand, and sent us on our way with instructions for care and a promise not to bill us. I paid him anyway. I always did. Once outside, I draped my coat over her shoulders before we filed into the coach. With the city rolling past outside, Elizabeth leaned her head against the seat and closed her eyes. The medicine Harwick had given her was taking effect, dulling the pain but also dulling her usual sharpness. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. "Thank you." "For what?" "For one hell of a night," she said, smiling, her eyes still closed. "Perhaps we can do it again sometime, without all the fighting, of course." "That sounds nice." But between the brandy and the medicine, I questioned her sincerity. The eye of the void sat in my coat pocket, its cold weight unsettling. But I found myself thinking less about the artifact and more about the woman sitting across from me, how she carried herself, how she danced. But mostly I thought about the way she looked when I handed her that rose. Something had changed between us tonight. I wondered whether she thought the same. "Buy you a drink?" I asked, breaking the silence. "I know a place." Elizabeth affected a thin smile. "Some other time." I kept the disappointment from my voice. "Fair enough." Forcing herself awake, she peered out the window to assess our location. Once she had the driver's attention, she called out an address in a part of the city I didn't recognize. Eventually the coach slowed, then stopped. "Let me out here," she said. I moved to help her down, but she waved me off, climbing out of the coach under her own power despite the pain it must have cost her. She stood on the cobblestones, the gaslight catching the ruin of her gown under my jacket. She regarded me through the open door, her look one of pure exhaustion. I held the eye out to her. "Might as well take it. You earned it." She looked at it, studying it. I wondered if she almost didn't want it. But finally she took it. "Maybe we'll find out tomorrow where to bring it. After that, will I see you again?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Elizabeth studied me. Whatever she saw, she kept her thoughts about it to herself. "That depends," she said. "On what?" "I don't know yet." She tucked the ruined rose into what remained of her bodice. "But I'll let you know." She strolled away, disappearing into the shadows of an alley. I settled against the cushioned seat, alone with the silence and the strange, unfamiliar feeling that I'd lost something I hadn't known I wanted. "Where to, sir?" the coachman called down. I gave him the address of a familiar tavern and settled in for the ride. I thought of auburn hair and a ruined rose all the way there. Chapter 12. The Next Night. The lazy minstrel hummed with its usual nightly energy. Dim amber light spilled through narrow windows, smoke from pipes in the kitchen hearth creating a haze that softened harsh edges. At the bar, airmen in for the night before their morning flight from the city argued over a dice game. The laughter of others rolled across the tavern in waves. Two off-duty guardsmen told stories of old to one another, their discussion punctuated by emphatic gestures and the occasional slam of a palm on wood. Near the fireplace, a traveling minstrel had claimed a stool and coaxed a melancholy tune from his lute, the notes weaving through conversations like a thread through fabric. A serving girl, Gabrielle, navigated the crowd with practiced ease, her tray laden with ales and wines that disappeared into waiting hands. The air smelled of roasted meat, pipe tobacco, and the particular alchemy that transformed strangers into temporary companions. Mismatched tables held Alchester's genuine characters rather than its posturing elite, people who'd earned their stories through living rather than inheriting them. I'd arrived early, claimed my usual corner table where I could watch both entries and exits, and settled in to wait. I wasn't sure she would come. Gabrielle brought wine without being asked. I stopped her before she poured. "Something stronger tonight, if you don't mind. Bring 2 glasses." Her eyebrows rose a fraction, but she retreated without comment. Ophelia ran a tight ship, and her staff knew better than to pry into customers' moods or motivations. A full measure of brandy arrived in each of 2 clean glasses, the amber liquid catching the lamplight and holding it. I didn't drink immediately. My arm still ached. My lip had stopped throbbing but remained tender. Consequences of the life I'd chosen, and a small price to pay given the reward. That reward, I hoped, was neither the eye nor the payment to come for completing my commission, but something else entirely. The door opened, and in walked Elizabeth, ducking under the low lintel, letting her senses adjust to the dim interior. She wore different clothes from last night, sensible trousers, a dark blouse, a coat that hung properly, rather than in blood-stained tatters. Her hair hung loose, concealing at least some of the bruise on her cheek, which had darkened to purple. When she crossed the room, she did so with the slowness of someone whose ribs still complained about sudden movements. She acknowledged a few regulars who recognized her. The lazy minstrel saw its share of guild members, and slid into the chair across from mine with a poorly disguised groan. Up close I saw the cuts along her cheek had scabbed over. The split in her lip matched mine. "You look terrible," I said, sliding the second glass closer. "Still hurt?" She lifted the glass in a gesture of thanks, then drank. "Only when I breathe. Guess I'm no longer the most attractive woman in the room, huh?" "On the contrary, the coloring accentuates your beauty." I thought the corners of her lips turned up in a smile, but the gesture vanished as quickly as it had appeared, and then it was down to business. "Hear anything from the wizard?" she asked. I leaned back in my chair with my glass in hand. Not a word. Me either. "The artifact?" I asked. She patted a coat pocket. "Safe. I'm not letting it out of my sight until it's delivered." She took another drink, wincing as it burned on the way down. "So, how'd you know I'd come?" "After last night, I knew you'd have a hard time staying away. The intrigue, the danger, the disguises. The look on Crost's face when you kicked him through the portal." We both chuckled at that. Once our laughter faded, Elizabeth leaned in and said in a hushed tone, "I did some asking around today." "About? What happened in that chamber, the portal, the person on the other side, Crost's involvement in whatever it all was?" "And?" "No one seemed to know," she said, pausing for dramatic effect, "until I started asking about Ashworth instead. Seems the Lord has gotten himself mixed up with the Sorcerers' League." "As in the Steel Islands Sorcerers' League?" "That's them." Elizabeth sipped her drink. "Crost and Ashworth obviously work together. Crost gets the goods, Ashworth provides the buyer, or something like that." "Huh." It made sense and explained why Crost wanted to make the exchange at the estate since he needed Ashworth's portal, a device the Lord must use to communicate with members of the League. I didn't know much about the Sorcerers' League other than what people whispered about them. Some think they're benevolent. Others, not so much. I suppose the truth lies somewhere in between. In any case, we'd need to watch our backs for a while in case they sent someone to even the score. I don't imagine Crost arriving without the artifact pleased the League. "Speaking of Crost," she said, "you didn't kill him." "You're right, I didn't." "Any particular reason why?" "I find that when a client doesn't provide specifics about a job, it allows me some leeway in how I complete the contract. Mordecai said to make sure the thief's employer, Mr. Crost, no longer did business in Alchester. I think I accomplished that quite handily, don't you think?" I honestly didn't know if Mordecai would accept my interpretation of his instructions. If the circumstances had been different, I would have killed Crost without a second thought. While I found kicking him through the portal highly satisfying, grabbing him by the collar, forcing him to the ground, and slitting his throat struck me as a safer, more definitive solution. But Elizabeth had entered the room. She'd made her thoughts clear about my profession, and I knew if I had killed Crost in front of her, she wouldn't be sitting here right now. "Crost is gone for now," Elizabeth said, "but the Steel Islands aren't that far away." "They're far enough." "You don't think Crost will make his way back here?" she asked. "I know he will, but until then, we watch our backs. In our line of work, we do that all the time anyway." Elizabeth nodded and took another sip of brandy. "You were rather convincing last night." "Was I? Doting, attentive, concerned for my welfare, especially when nobody was watching?" She flashed me a mischievous grin. "I almost believed it myself." I set my glass down. "Almost?" "I'm still deciding." The tavern door opened again, admitting a thin youth in a messenger's livery. He glanced around, spotted us in our corner, and navigated through the tables with practiced ease. He stopped beside Elizabeth, produced a sealed letter from his satchel, and held it out. "Why does this seem familiar?" I asked. "For Elizabeth West," the messenger said, "and her companion." Elizabeth took the letter, frowning. The seal was burgundy wax, unmarked by any sigil or crest. While the messenger scampered away, she broke it open and unfolded the parchment, tilting it toward the lamplight to read. I watched her expression shift from curiosity to resignation. "Let me guess," I said. "Mordecai. He wants the eye tonight." She passed the letter across the table. "And he has another job for us, both of us. We're to meet him at the corner of Merchant and Fifth in an hour, where the shop will appear." I scanned the letter's precise script, the polite phrasing that concealed the command beneath. Mordecai Solvane didn't request. He expected compliance, services rendered for payment not yet determined. "Another job," I said without enthusiasm. "That's what it says." I sighed. The wizard hasn't even paid us for the first one. I set the letter down and reached for my drink. Elizabeth did the same. We looked at each other across the table, the letter sitting between us like an unwelcome third party. "What do you think will happen if we're a little late?" Elizabeth mused. "I doubt much of anything. Mordecai wants the eye. If he has any power at all over the shop, he'll stay put until we arrive." Elizabeth downed the remainder of her drink. "Another?" I followed suit, emptying my glass. "Why not?" The serving girl brought another round without being asked. Ophelia must have noticed we'd settled in for the evening. The tavern's warmth wrapped around us, smoke and lamplight and the low murmur of conversation creating a cocoon against Alchester's chilly night. "You know what the worst part is?" Elizabeth said eventually. "I'm actually curious about what he wants me to steal next. What about you?" I weighed the question. In my line of work, the anticipation isn't quite the same, certainly not the enthusiasm. "You mean you don't look forward to murdering someone?" "That's not what I—" "Of course it is, and it's all right. It's a fair question. Look, there's a long story I won't bore you with about how I got here. I make no apologies for what I do. I didn't choose this life. It chose me, if that makes sense." Elizabeth nodded. Because I think she understood. Perhaps the circumstances that led her to a life of thievery mirrored my own in some ways. But I never look forward to the next commission. I went on. It's a job, not unlike any other. Except someone dies when you're done. Or gets kicked through a portal. That seemed to provide some levity to the otherwise dark turn our conversation had taken. Elizabeth chuckled, but she quickly stopped when a wince of pain shot through her. You really shouldn't make me laugh right now. We could go see what Mordecai wants. Nothing funny about that crusty old bugger. Elizabeth settled into her chair. Not yet. Mordecai's a wizard, right? Time probably passes differently for him, don't you think? Excellent rationalization. An hour to us might mean seconds to him. Never mind that his berating us for arriving late once already quite handily proved he told time the exact way we all did. More drinks arrived. We lifted them in a silent toast. To what exactly, I couldn't say. Survival? Partnership? To the strange, unfamiliar feeling that sitting here with each other felt more right than anything had in a long time? All of those, perhaps. What mattered was that we were here, and neither of us was in a hurry to go anywhere else. You've reached the end of this adventure. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel to get a notification when each new story is available. You can view all my books and get the latest news by visiting scottmarlowe.com.